Good evening. Welcome to the June 2023 City Council meeting. The meeting is hereby called to order. Members of the public may attend this City Council meeting in person or may watch and listen remotely by viewing the meeting on Channel 8 WCTV and at the city's website at www.wayzata.org/WCTV. Public comment during the public forum and/or public hearing portions of the meeting may be provided in person at the meeting in advance or by logging into the Zoom call and raising your hand during the public hearing. When your name is called in the meeting, you will be seen and heard in our council chambers and the cable channel. You will be asked to unmute, and then you may begin your comment. All public comments must include your full name and address. Second item this evening on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I would ask everyone to please stand and follow along. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Third item on the agenda this evening is the roll call. Please let the record reflect that all members of the council are present. I'd also like to note that earlier this evening, this council did participate in a workshop where we reviewed and discussed our long-term staffing plan, an update of our muni operations, and review of the new financial tracking scorecard. And lastly, we had a discussion surrounding strategic planning dates. Next item this evening is to approve the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as is, or would anyone care to make any changes?
So moved, Madam Mayor, to approve the agenda as is.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion passes. All right, our next up this evening is our public forum. I would like to just go through a couple of items with regard to the public forum. As a reminder for those members of the public in attendance this evening who are interested in speaking, we ask that you please state your name and address, indicate if you are representing a group, and we also ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. If the item you wish to speak about is something that is on the agenda, for those that are in person, please fill out a blue form at the table in the back of the room and hand it to staff. For those that are watching via Zoom, please send a note via chat to staff. Let them know which agenda item you'd like to speak about. And we will also require that your camera is turned on when you speak. City Manager, do we have anybody online that would like to speak during the public forum?
Madam Mayor, we do not.
Okay. I would like to invite Becky Pearson from the Greater Wayzata Chamber of Commerce. I think she has a few updates with regard to the events of the weekend.
I do. Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members, staff. I am very excited to be here to share the news. If you haven't seen it yet, hopefully you've seen it in many different ways, but this weekend is the Wayzata Art Experience. So this is our 19th year, and we are looking forward to it. Just to give you a little bit of a rundown of the weekend, on Friday, we will be closing Lake Street from Broadway to Barry, and that will be allowing all of our artists to be setting up in that area. We've got 150 artists that will be coming in, fine artists, so we're very excited. We had a tremendous amount of interest this year, so excited to be able to accommodate them on the street. We will also be having an area down by Barry and Lake for beer and wine sales on Friday from 4 to 8. We're doing that because of the activity that is now also going to be happening that weekend with the Wham Fest. So maybe I'll come back to that in a minute. But then on Saturday and Sunday are the main days of the art show. It'll be on Saturday from 10 until 6 and on Sunday from 10 until 4. So along with the artists, we will have in the Panaway area, we will have a activity zone. We also have a featured artist that will be bringing in with Petals for a Purpose. She will be bringing in some beautiful floral installations around in the Panaway area as well as along the street, so we're excited about her. There'll be free sailboat rides. We will have a lovely little Island of Music on Minnetonka, so just small little background sipping, shopping type of music. And then we also will have on Saturday and Sunday, we will have a number of food trucks that will be in that area between Berry and extending west for a couple of blocks. That will be extending a little bit further than we did in the past, and we'll also have some food artisans in that area as well. So looking forward to that event. I will just take an opportunity to mention that new to the weekend, and we're including it on our schedule, is Wham Fest. And this is something that is, it will be a similar location and scale, I would say, to the Beach Bash that has happened in the past with James J. Hill Days. So Rick Bourne and RBA Consulting, they are bringing that in, and it's EDM, so it's electric dance music type of genre. So it's going to be on Friday and Saturday evening. Steve Aoki will be performing on Friday night, and Griffin on Saturday night. Those are names that are quite popular if you're interested in that type of music. And I understand today, actually, we had a meeting with city staff and the police chief and fire chief, and we were putting our heads together for a last little connection before the weekend, and understand that Saturday night with Griffin is sold out as of this morning, and tickets also are selling. I think we've got they have about, I want to say around 3,300, or they anticipate that we may be up to about 4,000 on Friday night. So doors open at 5, and so we were anticipating that there would be a number of people coming into town for that evening, so we decided we would have a way to have some hospitality for them. And because they will also have that performance on Friday night, we gave the option for our artists, if they wanted to set up and be open that evening, they would be able to do that. So we will have a good amount of artists, actually, that will also be open on Friday evening. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Any questions for Ms. Pearson?
I
So,
have one.
yes, please.
Rain or sunshine?
Great question. It depends on the moment, I would say.
'Cause we have a history, don't we?
We have had a history, yes, and we also have had some great luck. So it does look, there might be something on Saturday, but I don't trust those things this far out. And we've got plans in place if we do get it, and we connect very closely with the Hennepin County weather and keep an eye on things. So,
I'm excited to go down.
yeah, well, thank you. Bring your umbrella, and we'll be sure not to have any weather then. That would be
That's
great.
Water the flowers, bring your umbrella, and it'll be
Right,
dry.
right.
It's a dry day. Question for city manager. Music is anticipated, so Wham Fest, 5 to 10 p.m., are those the anticipated hours?
Correct, yep.
Okay. And the music, so those who may be watching aren't familiar with the music, it's a little bit louder, a little younger crowd. And so
Boom, psh, boom, psh, boom, psh.
their windows, the music is supposed to be broadcast out more towards the lake, but there
Right, the
will
direction
still
of the
be some
stages.
noise for those who do live along Lake Street. You might not want to office on Lake Street Friday or Saturday night unless you have your noise-canceling headphones. And if anybody has any questions or concerns, and call Jeff. But we are excited to open this up to another venue, to have a music event, slightly different genre than we may have heard in the past, but sometimes it's nice to dip our toes in the waters that we haven't done before.
Yeah,
And we're
exact-
grateful to Mr. Bourne and RBA for venturing off in this direction.
And I
Madam-
think they do have a lot, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, Madam Mayor, the general timeframe will be very similar to what we've all witnessed and been a part of for James J. Hill Days. The difference will be is that it's in the middle of summer, so there'll still be some light out when the music is ending. So that'll be unique and hopefully a safer environment because it'll be light out most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we know that there will be a strong police and
Right.
fire presence, not only from our own police department, but neighboring departments as well. So we're grateful for that, and also to Public Works and the Chamber
Yeah.
for coordinating all of this. And
Thank
we wish you a lot of luck. Any indication as to why there's been kind of this uptick in interest this year as opposed to years past?
No, I don't know. It's a great question. I don't know if people are just continuing to come out of COVID and just looking for more opportunities to be out. I mean, I hate to even say COVID anymore because I just, But, so I don't know if it's that. We have had some artists in the past that have said, this is a great event. Would you ever consider having more artists here just to bring in, even more interest? So I don't know. It's hard to say. So we'll see. We're looking forward to it, but. No, but what I also was just going to mention too, just from the lakeside, I do think that there's a lot of light and production in the Wham Fest too. So people might see that from the lake. We might see some people gathering on the lake as well. And then one very cute, charming point that I forgot to mention is the Wayzata Yacht Club on Saturday night. We'll be doing a boat parade through Wayzata Bay with lights on their boats around 9:15. So that's, I think, going to be a fun little addition for people that are in town. They can take that in.
That'll be great. In terms of beach access that night, because this is very different, at what time are the barricades going up? Because we need to be able to control, or the organizers are in need of putting some barricades up to control who can come and go out of the event in that location. So access to the beach will be closed off at some point.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, we will preserve access during the day for the folks that want to use the beach or the marina. They'll just have to be creative and park at a different location. But the beach will actually be closed, I think, right kind of before the concert starts, Chief, right? Around 4 or 5?
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock, yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Very good. Well, best of luck. Let's
Thank you.
hope,
Thank you for
it'll
your
be
support
as
and
sunny.
partnership. We look forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. No other public forum items? All right. Then we will move on to new agenda items. Does any member of the council wish to bring up new agenda item to discuss at a future meeting? Okay. Then we will move on to the consent agenda. On this evening's consent agenda, we have the following items: approval of the City Council workshop and regular meeting minutes of June 6, 2023, approval of the check register, approval of municipal licenses, receipt of police activity report, receipt of the building activity report, adoption of resolution 38-2023 designating the city appointments and assignments for 2023 to include League of Minnesota Cities 4M Fund as a depository for city funds, adoption of resolution 37-2023 appointing, is it Ava?
Yes.
Ava, thank you. McNanley as the Energy and Environment Committee student member. Approval of CMT janitorial services agreement. Approval of the second reading and adoption of ordinance 825, approving zoning text amendments to Chapter 936 tree preservation ordinance, Chapter 918 fencing and screening, and Chapter 902 rules and regulations. Approval of data storage, server sharing, and governance agreement between the Wayzata Police Department and other Lake Minnetonka Area Consortium police agencies. Approval of professional services agreement with Walker Consultants for preparation of a feasibility report related to access management for the Mill Street parking ramp. Approval of professional services agreement with Braun Intertech Corporation for testing services related to the construction of the Panaway Lake Walk. Authorization of additional services related to BNSF pedestrian crossing design. And lastly, adoption of Resolution 30-2023, accepting donations for Earth Day 2023. Do any members of the council wish to pull an item for further discussion or questions? Alex?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, there are actually 2 items I'd like to pull for separate discussion tonight. That would be item K, approval of professional services agreement with Walker Consultants and so on. And the very next one, approval of professional services agreement with Braun Intertech.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Anyone else care to pull any items? Yes, Kathy?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to add to that. B, approval of the check register,
Okay, very good.
as well as M, authorization of additional services related to BNS pedestrian crossing design.
Okay,
The check register is a quick question. If we want to get that now versus later at the end of the meeting, I'm happy to do that if you recommend that.
all right, thank you, Kathy. Jeff, any items for you?
Nope, they got them all.
All right, Molly. Right, well, let's tackle these one at a time. Maybe we can answer them quickly and incorporate them. If not, we'll put them at the end of the agenda for further discussion. Kathy, would you like to begin with your questions with regard to the check register?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. This is actually probably for staff. It's on page 16 in our packet. Under Fund 233, our Lakefront Fund, there's 3 checks that have been written for the amount of $174,000. Can you please help me understand where the money for that fund comes from? And how that money was used in this particular case?
Absolutely. Good question, Councilmember Iverson. Madam Mayor, so that expense is for the actual equipment and the fences, the gates for the upgraded crossings for Broadway and Berry. And that is actually, those expenses will be reimbursed through the state of Minnesota through a grant that we received, I think, back in 2017.
And so, Jeff, maybe that will help with my question on the other one. I believe on number M, you talk about a grant that we got from the state for that. Let me see if I can find it real quick for like $400,000. Give me 1 second, I'll find it for you. On page 143 of our packet, financial considerations, this has to deal with B&S pedestrian crossing
Yes.
design. So that is coming from that grant that we got of $400,000.
Yeah, so the whole rail project is around $600,000. $400,000 of it will be paid for by that grant, and the rest will be offset by TIF. We have found that is an eligible cost.
Okay, so when we come back and talk about that, so $174,000 has already been taken out of that $400,000?
Yes, yep.
Correct. Okay, thank you.
Since we're on the topic of the pedestrian crossing, do you want to go ahead and ask your questions on that item as well?
Yes, give me just 1 second. It really has to do, so we have, for the people in our audience, thank you, we have a balance left of $295,000 for this project, and it states that it will be paid with the Lakefront Fund, and then ultimately reimbursed by TIF. My concern is that this TIF money, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, is not allocated to come until 2030 sometime, 36, 37. And so ultimately, who pays for it in the interim?
In the interim, more than likely, the Lakefront Fund will carry the difference.
Okay, so it will not come out of our general fund?
Well, the Lakefront, not the general operating fund, no. But the Lakefront Fund is a general fund. It's not an enterprise fund or, similar to like wine and spirits, bar and grill, or the motor vehicle department.
Okay,
But it's not in our annual operating fund. It will not be paid for by or funded by the levy.
Okay, so help me, just educate me a little bit. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Does that come out from tax dollars?
The Lakefront Fund has been funded through excess funds over the years, grants, TIF, conservancy donations, and I think those are the primary sources. So not levy dollars, but if we've had over the years excess funds, they have been directed towards the Lakefront Fund, in addition to, parks and trails and facilities and equipment as well.
Okay, I'm just kind of trying to keep my eye on how often we're referring to using that TIF fund so that that our residents are aware of where that money is going and that it's funds that we will have, but we won't
Right.
see them for a while. So I'm just trying to be a little watchdog on this, so thank you.
Good questions.
So, okay, great, thank you, Kathy. Just a follow-up question to Councilmember Iverson's questions. With regard to the 295, was that all already included in our TIF analysis? And there are no additional costs, correct? We did a complete TIF analysis of what we could
Right.
use for what portions of the project.
That was
were
already
still
included.
aligned.
Yeah, still aligned, and there's even a significant cushion in that analysis too. So that's all been figured, and this has been part of that estimated kind of cost.
Okay, perfect,
It's an
thank you.
obligation.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Kathy, good questions. Next, we'll go to Alex. Alex, you had a couple of items you'd like to have clarification on.
Actually, I would like to have them pulled for two reasons. Item K, because we're being asked to vote as a consent agenda to approve an expenditure that was quite a bit out of the budget. We may approve it, but I'd like there to be a transparency of discussion as to why we have an overage that's so significant.
Are you talking about Braun Intertech Corporation?
Yes,
Yes,
that one.
okay, all right.
And then the other one, I'm inclined not to vote for it, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
And if it's in the consent agenda, you don't have that option, so.
Nope. Okay, let's do this then. Let's pull items K and L. We'll add those in that order to the end of the agenda after we deal with new business. Any other questions before we move on with the consent agenda for this evening? Okay. And would someone care to make a motion to approve the consent agenda items A through J and M as in Mary and N as in Nancy?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. And as I stated, then we will discuss items K and L. If someone could please remind me in the event I forget. Consent. All right. Thank you. That was a long list of consent agenda items. Next up this evening is new business, and under new business, we will be considering Resolution 35-2023 denying rezoning CUPs for joint parking and first-floor multiple-family dwellings, shoreland PUD/CUP, and SIP/CUP, and project design at 200 Lake Street East. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well done. That was a mouthful. Emily Gellner, our Community Development Director, is going to be walking, or at least introing this, and kind of tag team it with our consultant planner, Erica Weber.
Okay, good evening.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The property address is 200 Lake Street East, and the applicant and owner is Lake West Development LLC, present this evening. And we have Resolution 35-2023. I'll detail the resolution here in this presentation. First, let's just start with the zoning of the property. It is zoned as planned unit development, and this is the planned unit development district, and the property is bound by the terms of the PUD agreement that runs with the land, which is for an office building. The property is guided as central business district in our 2040 comprehensive plan, which supports a variety of uses and supports a vitality of our downtown area, mostly along Lake Street. This property is quite unique. You can note the length of the property. It's very long. It's over 1,000 feet long, spanning from Berry Avenue to Ferndale Road. And there are a lot of mixture of uses in this area. It's close to Lake Minnetonka and the Wayzata Beach, as well as the Boatworks building. It's close to the historic depot, as well as a number of redevelopments that have occurred on the north side of the street. It's also very close to the BNSF railroad tracks as well. And the property gets quite narrow, particularly on the east side. The property is currently vacant. It was vacated a couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, and it was used by the TCF headquarters for a number of years. Prior to being zoned the PUD district in 1989, the property was zoned C4A, and the property was developed as a PUD with the TCF office building and the associated parking lots in 1990. It was used for this purpose then until it was vacated and then recently sold.
There are 6 requests this evening. We will run through each of these requests as we describe the projects so that we don't repeat the requests multiple times during the presentation. And as we talk about each of the requests this evening, we'll also discuss what the Planning Commission's recommendation was. So I think I'll just, instead of running through the entire list, we are going to go through each one in detail, so I think we'll do it that way. But we are very intentional about the order of which we have shown you these requests and the way that we outline them in the reports. We begin with the zoning map amendment because that's such a fundamental component of these entitlements, and that request is to rezone the property from PUD to C4A. And then as we move through the other entitlements, they assume that we're already rezoning to C4A. So at the proposed site plan, we have 6 different cores here. Technically, they're all considered one building. They all have the same building foundation and the same underground parking, but there are 6 unique cores. This is required by our design standards that we provide a massing break between buildings to relieve some of that massing that's felt from the street. You'll see in the blue and the pink, the blue represents the office that's proposed on the first floor, and the pink represents the residential on the first floor. They are planning to, of course, remove the existing building to construct this mixed-use building. The total square footage of the entire development is 178,000 square feet, just a bit more than that. And then the office is located only on the first floor, and then there are a total of 30 condominium units in this project. I have a few images of renderings here. You'll note that the buildings include brick and limestone caps, paneled siding, fiberglass columns, and as well as other materials, and these materials comply with the city's design standards. And there are numerous entrances that face Lake Street at the sidewalk level. Here's a couple renderings that show those entrances and the massing breaks that are located within this proposal. So I'd like to turn it over to Consulting Planner Eric Swaber to detail the different requests, Mayor, and then I'll finish the presentation, and then we'll see if you have any questions. The applicant also has a presentation tonight.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you, Community Development Director Geldner and Mayor and City Council. First, we're going to go over the previous applications. There will be 4 that we'll review. There was 2 applications in 2020. The first one was demolishing the existing building, constructing 3 new buildings that would total 66 multifamily dwelling units. The requests at that time were comprehensive plan amendment to high-density residential, rezoning to R5, shoreland impact, conditional use permit, and then 5 variances. That ultimately was withdrawn by the applicant. The second request, later in 2020, was another 3-building development, but this time they were going to remodel the existing building into a residential building and construct 2 buildings, one on each side, for a total of 38 multifamily residences. In that case, they were requesting a planned unit development, concept plan, and a 3-lot preliminary plat. Ultimately, after the recommendation by the Planning Commission, the City Council chose to deny that application. Their third application was in 2021, in which there was 2 separate buildings that were split in the middle by basically a parking ramp. That one, they requested the PUD concept plan, but they also requested 2 design deviations. One being that the larger of the 2 buildings would lack the required massing breaks, and there would be an insufficient 3rd-story setback. After review by the Planning Commission, the applicant withdrew that application. And then last year, they came back with another 2 development application, same kind of missing middle that provided an access to the parking ramp, but this one did comply with the massing breaks, but ultimately, based on the recommendation from the Planning Commission, the City Council did deny that application, which gets us to the application request for today. So as Community Development Director Geldner said, This qualifies all as one building, but because of the requirement for the massing breaks at least every 150 feet, it's broken into 6 cores. What I'd like to highlight, I'll highlight some with the building height later. Regarding the density, we are looking at the residential units here. There are 8 units on the first floor. Those are in 4 each in core core A5 and core A6. And then you can see the remaining 22 units are on the second floor of all the buildings. Ultimately, the requirement for properties within the central business district is that they fall within a range of 20 to 30 units per acre. This development is proposed at 21.28 units per acre. So it falls within the density requirements of the comprehensive plan. There is also a requirement for open space, particularly in this case due to its location within the shoreland district, and we'll get into more details of that when we get to that section. But you can see on the top in white where the cores are, and then all the other space other than the entrance to the parking ramp would qualify as open space, but they fall into different categories basically by how much of the space is available to the public. So for the calculation based on residential units, there must be at least 500 square feet of open space per residential unit, which is a requirement of 15,000. You'll see the pink and the yellow, which are spaces that are available to the residents of those buildings, were almost 14,000 square feet, or sorry, 24,000 square feet. So they meet the open space requirement for the residential. A couple other things they're doing to expand the open space is they're refurbishing the existing mini park that is recorded through an easement on the far east side of this development. You can see there both the plan and the rendering of what they're proposing. They are also constructing a green space on the west end, which is intended for use of the residents of this development. You see both the plan and the rendering to make that kind of secluded, tree-lined open space on the west side. So we had quite a bit of conversation at the Planning Commission about building height. And the reasons why is we need to determine both what is the average grade plane and what is the mean height of a sloped roof in order to calculate building height by our definition within the city code. Again, this is one building, so it's looking at the foundation of the entire building all the way from core A1 to core A6. You see on the bottom, which is core A1, the average grade plane is about 6 feet higher than the sidewalk level. And then when you look at core A6, the same average grade plane is about 7 feet lower than the sidewalk level. So the site is highest to the west, lowest to the east. The average grade plane ends up falling about in the middle of that difference. You could also see there that's part of the reason why that core A1 has an appearance, has a facade that is taller. But again, we are looking at what does the code call for in building height. The red line is the mean elevation of the sloped roofs, and that shows 2 stories and 30 feet, which is the maximum building height for the C4A zoning district. But we just wanted to illustrate this for the difference between what the public will see and what our code determines the building height is. So this is sections through the same part of the building, again showing that in core A1, that falls even a little above what the commercial space would be, but at the sidewalk is about 6 feet above the sidewalk. Looking at core A6, that average grade plane goes through the garage underneath the building. For the sloped roof, you can see they follow generally the same location on both buildings. It's just, again, from the sidewalk to the roof appears you have more of a facade on core A1 than A6. Another point we'd like to illustrate is that they are including mezzanines in 4 of the 6 cores. That will happen to be cores A1, A2, A3, and the east half of A4. Mezzanine is a definition within the building code. The building code says that a mezzanine does not count as an additional story as long as it's not more than 30% of any given room. So not the entire unit. Any room that a mezzanine is located in, it cannot be more than 30% of the floor footprint of that room. So they are including mezzanines. This is shown here in green. You could see it's a minority of the unit itself because there's only certain rooms where a mezzanine would actually function, basically the living room and maybe part of the kitchen. So the first request we're going to review is the zoning map amendment. Currently, the property is PUD. The request is to go to C4A. So we reviewed all the code requirements with the Planning Commission, and these are the findings that they made and are included in the Planning Commission report and recommendation. First, the proposed use does not comply with the comprehensive plan due to overall size, scale, and density. Second, the proposal raises significant concern with parking and loading, and we'll get into more details about that in the parking CUP. The proposed use does not conform with all the performance standards, including lack of designating an adequate amount of parking. Again, we'll get into more detail about that with the parking CUP, a lack of clear and adequate areas for deliveries and loading, and concern of significant parking for uses beyond the offices that are listed within the plan itself. Then there were parking issues noted that would have a negative effect on the area. The proposed uses would not have any known negative effect on property values in the city. Traffic generate would not be sufficiently well managed. That mostly has to do with loading, which again we'll get into with the parking CUP, and the proposed use would negatively impact existing public streets, including traffic flow along Lake Street. So the Planning Commission report and recommendation was a denial of the rezoning for the reasons listed here. So the next request is a CUP for a joint use of a 142 stall parking facility. So on top, you see that the facility goes the entire distance from core A6 on the west to core A1 on the very east. A couple of my slides will get into more details of this specific layout of it, but the parking stalls for both the proposed office uses and the condominiums are located underneath cores A2, A3, A4, A5, and A6. Here is the joint facility CUP calculation based on Ordinance 819, which was approved November 1st of last year. We'll get into more detail on that on the next page, but this calculation on its own has 134 stalls, but I do want to point out for the condominiums, to make that calculation, 60% of those stalls would be used from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. So the residents of the condominiums cannot have dedicated parking stalls because all of the stalls are shared. So when somebody is in one of the condominium units, they need to make sure that their stalls can be available for the office uses at the same time. So to get into a little bit more detail on the calculations themselves, the parking stalls provided is 142 stalls. Before the adoption of Ordinance 819, again, last November 1st, the parking requirement for the office would allow a 10% deduction to go from gross to net. That would get down to 106 stalls, which is what's in the staff report. Since the Planning Commission approval, we have discussed with the applicant what the mixed-use building ordinance, which is that Ordinance 819, would allow for the office uses, and that would be 98 stalls. There's a 60 stall requirement for condominiums. So just taking the two uses together, you would be required to have 158 stalls, which you'll note there is 16 stalls more than what's provided in the 142. So this is why they are requesting the CUP, the conditional use permit for this joint facility, where the base requirement for the office would be 98 at that max period of 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. All 98 stalls would be required. During the same period, the 60 stalls for the condominium, 36 of those would be used for a total of 134. So looking at the two uses separately, this project does not have enough parking. The joint facility CUP is an application that the applicant can make to request less than them separately in a joint use. But again, part of the requirement of that joint use is that the condominiums are going to have to free up some parking stalls during the day to allow for the office stalls to be used. Another part that we discussed quite a bit with the Planning Commission is loading and deliveries. So there is 2 loading areas in this proposal, as is required by code. First, here on the south side of the parking facility, and it is large enough essentially for a semi-vehicle. There is a second loading area, which is located kind of on the underneath the plaza between Core A1 and Core A2, that would be large enough for like an Amazon delivery vehicle. Our city code says that only half of the loading stalls have to be that semi-size. So they have the 2 loading areas that's required. They also have the trash and recycling. The issue that we spend a lot of time discussing is there is no turnaround within the parking lot for a semi-sized vehicle. So a semi coming in for moving purposes or other kind of loading is either going to need to go down Lake Street and back into this garage, or the opposite, pull into the garage, but then back onto Lake Street. So some of the findings we discussed in the rezoning were that a delivery vehicle backing onto Lake Street or off of Lake Street is going to cause interference, even if the traffic study based on the automobile trips say that the road can handle the automobile trips. The semi-vehicle doing the loading and unloading in this scenario has to back up one of 2 motions. So the Planning Commission report and recommendation recommended denial of the joint parking facility conditional use for a number of reasons. But first, the parking plan would not be fully compatible with the present uses in the area, including traffic flow, deliveries, maintenance, and available street and surface parking for visitors and guests. Second, the parking plan would not adequately address all the applicable performance standards for shared parking and loading of residents, workers, guests, deliveries, and emergency vehicles and maintenance. And then the third is the uses discussed by the applicant at the Planning Commission meeting and the public hearing would likely exceed the parking demand generated with the land use table. What this one is discussing, the plans submitted were 100% office uses for the commercial space. But when we talked about the different types of commercial uses that could be there, be it retail, be it restaurant, those all have different demands. And just to go back for one example, with this use as 100% office and 100% condominiums, it's 134 stalls. If you did a 100% retail and 100% condo, what happens is the time is different. It would be during the weekend, and it would be 75% condominium demand. That would actually create a demand of 143 stalls, which is one less, or one more than what is provided in 142. So the mix of uses is very important when we're calculating the joint facilities. So that's why that third bullet, talking about what was discussed at the Planning Commission, likely would not meet the requirements of the joint parking facility. There probably is a mix, but not all mixes. The fourth bullet is the proposed use would have a negative effect on the area in which it's proposed. Again, we discussed the loading dock and that semi is going to have to back up one of the two areas. Fifth bullet, the traffic generation by the proposed use would overburden and negatively affect the capacity of the street serving the area. Again, really getting to that delivery semi vehicle. And then finally, the proposed uses impact on public streets would be negative. So again, we looked at the first two uses. The Planning Commission recommended, or the first two requests, the rezoning and the the CUP for the joint parking facilities. The Planning Commission recommended denial of both of those. We're going to go into the next four and just tell the outcome. The Planning Commission was encouraged by many of the changes from the other proposals, and they actually recommended approval of these other four changes. But as Community Development Gildner stated, if you're going to recommend denial of the rezoning, you can't approve any of the other ones because it's really depending on the rezoning. So the request, third request is the conditional use permit for multifamily dwellings on the first floor. Again, this is specifically for cores A5 and A6. It is the southern half, the side farthest from Lake Street. So the findings were the residential units of the project would not front on Lake Street, which is a requirement. The project would not conflict with the existing or potential future commercial uses and activities. The density of the project would meet the standards of the R5, and there is adequate open space and recreational space on site to benefit the occupants. So they did recommend approval of the conditional use permit for first floor residential. The third request is the planned unit development conditional use permit for 30 residential condominiums within the shoreland district. So the graphic on the top, the shoreland district requires that you draw tiers 200 feet from the lake shore. In this case, it happens to be the marina would be the closest shoreline. And so those purple and then orange and then blue circles are basically the first tier, second tier, and third tier. The code says that you can transfer density to a tier further from the shoreline, but you can't transfer it from the further tier to the nearest tier. So the first tier would have to comply with the density of 20 to 30 units, which it does at 16. The second tier also, the first and second tier could be less, which is really what the PUD-CUP is trying to encourage, less density closest to the shoreline, and transfer that density to the farthest tier. Even though if we looked at the individual tiers, they all fall outside of that 20 to 30 units an acre. We want the ones that are less than 20 to be the ones closest, and the ones that exceed the 30 to be the furthest. So this complies, and therefore, the Planning Commission report and recommendation were that the residential units do not have a negative effect on the community and surrounding area. The residential units are consistent with the comprehensive plan. At least 30% of the development is landlord-controlled open space, which we kind of hinted to earlier with the open space exhibit. There is no density variation for the residential units. The proposed building does not request a building height deviation. And then finally, open space will be preserved for the public in perpetuity. So the Planning Commission did find that they could recommend approval of this residential PUD CUP. The fifth request is for shoreland impact plan conditional use permit for impervious coverage greater than 75%. They are proposing 84.5%. They are showing that the existing impervious surface is just under 75% at 74.4. The proposal will get up to 84.7. Now, when we looked at the standards of that request, the project would generally meet the standards of that are required. So they did recommend approval of the SIP CUP. A couple of specific requirements is that they provided a stormwater management plan that was acceptable to the city engineer, and we will discuss that when we get to their comments. Another one that was that the lot coverage was below 75%, which it was. The impervious surface is over 75%. So the last one is the design review. There were two deviations identified by staff, and we'll go through both of them. The first being that the significant massing break proposed between core A1 and A2 does not provide views to Lake Minnetonka. What they provided is both on the left, the view from the sidewalk between core A1 and A2, and what you see is the sidewalk. But if you look to the right, there is an existing railroad berm there, shown both as a line of sight illustration on the top and a photo on the bottom. There is no existing view from that location of Lake Minnetonka. So there's nothing to maintain. So ultimately, the Planning Commission did recommend approval of that massing break. So they said there would be little, if any, negative impact of the massing break deviation, since there is presently no view of the lake from that vantage point. And then secondly, any impacts are outweighed by the other, greater conformity with the other standards. The final design deviation was the requirement of having commercial to a depth of 30 feet along the sidewalk. So what they have is they have a parking structure through most of that sidewalk level facade, and they have a commercial area that has a minimum density of 12.9 feet. So their commercial depth is not the requirement of the 30 feet. But ultimately, due to the design of Core A1, they said there is little, if any, negative impact of the parking structure deviation that comprise a small part of the building at the entrance of the parking facility and allows the attractive architectural features of that particular core. And then the final bullet is that the impacts are outweighed by the greater conformity with the other standards. So there were 6 requests, which had 7 items. The Planning Commission recommended denial of both the rezoning and the parking CUP, even though they recommended approval of the other 5 items. Without the rezoning, the remaining items would not comply. So a couple other items that just have to do with other sections of the code. They do have a tree preservation plan where they show the removal on the top and the proposed landscaping on the bottom. Would point out this proposal would provide a fee in lieu of tree replacement for almost 80 caliper inches of trees. Getting into the city engineer's comments, he had conducted an utility analysis showing both this development and the proposed development at 201 Lake Street across the street. And even if both were to develop, the existing sewer and water infrastructure is adequate to support those developments. The second bullet, the tree preservation plan meets the city requirements, but the city engineer would like to consider planting trees in city parks in lieu of collecting the fee in lieu of tree replacement. Third bullet is that there is an existing Metropolitan Council Urban Environmental Services easement on the property, and they would need to get approval from that entity before planting the trees they're proposing. Finally, the traffic study, which again, the traffic study looked at the passenger vehicles and the amount of trips. That did not have an impact on the surrounding roads or networks, but the city engineer also provided that parking and loading of direct delivery vehicles within the Lake Street East right-of-way is prohibited. So the shared concern about how delivery vehicles are going to function with this proposal. The applicant did conduct a neighborhood meeting back on April 24th. 23 people were in attendance. They provided a summary of those discussions, which is included in your packet, as well as a sign-in sheet. The questions that were asked were regarding the access to Lake Street and vehicle parking, traffic impacts, delivery vehicles, the shading of the sidewalks from those cores, maintenance during snow and ice, particularly of the sidewalk, the railroad's reaction to the plan, how much of these spaces are accessible to the public, and then stormwater management and treatment. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Community Development Director Geldner.
Thank you. A letter was sent by the applicant to neighbors that live within 750 feet of the proposal in April, and also they received a public hearing notice shortly thereafter, and there was a neighborhood meeting in April. There were a number of concerns expressed at the neighborhood meeting at that time, similar to what was shared at the Planning Commission meeting. There were 14 public comments that were in your agenda packet, and you received one today that was printed at the dais as well. There was a mixture of support and concern for this project. And just to conclude, the Planning Commission approved the PC report and recommendation. It recommends denial of the rezoning and denial of the joint parking CUP, but acknowledges approval of the first floor residential as well as the shoreland as PUD CUP and SIP CUP, and then the project design. So to conclude, since the rezoning and the CUP for joint parking are essential to this application, the other requests are really dependent on those approvals. And so the resolution that's in your packet this evening is for a denial of all the requests, since we couldn't practically issue a building permit for this project without those two key requests. So we'll conclude there and just see if you have any questions, Mayor and Council.
Thank you, Ms. Gilner. Questions of staff before we move on to the applicant? Yes, Molly?
Planner Swaber, for clarification, can you tell us if the density amount includes with the residential CUP, all of these numbers, the density and the parking requirements?
I don't think your microphone is working. That's good.
I apologize. Can I ask a follow-up question? The density compared to the parking requirements?
Just both of those two separately.
Okay,
Our numbers are factoring that these 8 first floor units are residential, correct?
Right. So
And-
there is a total of 30 dwelling units within the complex. 8 of them are located on the first floor, and then the other 22 are located on the second floor. The parking requirement standalone for 30 dwelling units is 2 dwelling units per unit, so that's 60. As we talked about with the parking standard, if we took the commercial uses and residential uses and just added them together, they're short. But the code does have an opportunity to request a conditional use permit where they would have a shared parking. There you go, that's a good exhibit, in that the base requirement would be 158 stalls, and they're providing 142. With the ordinance that was passed last year for mixed-use buildings, with their 100% office in the proposal, that would be 134. So without the CUP, they're short 16 stalls. With the CUP and their proposed 100% office, it says they are, they have 8 more stalls than's needed.
Okay. So, follow-up question, if they didn't have the residential on the first floor, how would that affect the density of the building? And then, same question, but how would it affect the parking requirements?
I don't have enough information right now to tell you the density itself. Here's the reason why. When we calculate residential density, we calculate how much of the building is residential and how much is commercial. If I recall correctly, it's about 60% of the building is residential, 40% is commercial. So we take the lot area, which is roughly 100,000 square feet, and we break it out in that 80 by 40. And so if, that's about 60,000 square feet. If we just had the 22 and it worked out to be 50%, then we're 50,000 by the 22. I'd have to do the exact math, but it feels pretty close to 20. But the proposal is all 30 meets that requirement. Regarding the parking, they would remove 8 units, which would then remove 16 stalls. So the new requirement would be 44 stalls for the 22 units.
Okay.
But we would need to add in office or commercial space, and particularly with the joint facilities, figure out what time. So it's not an easy math to say if you took out the 14, do they not meet the standard?
Understood. And then if they went from office only to, say, retail, they would need more parking. If they went to restaurants, they would need even more parking spots.
Let's talk about that a second. Office and retail on a square footage basis is the same. 3 stalls per 1,000 square feet. So if you had office, 1,000 square feet of office, the base would be 3 parking stalls. 1,000 square feet of retail, the base would be 3. What happens is retail hits at a different time of day. It hits on the weekend, and at that point, on the weekend, you would expect more residents to be around. So the condominium requirement on the weekend is 45 stalls, not 36. Now, where I want to pause is if you actually had a mix of office and retail, it could actually be better. Because when office has this peak use and when retail has this peak use are at different times. So there's no easy answer other than if 100% of the office space became retail because of the increase in the amount of parking needed for the condominiums, they would be short 1 stall. But a mix might actually be better. Now, if you add restaurants, if we looked at our parking demand previous to our recent adoption, where we'd need to look at, kitchen space, bar space, sitting space, Our previous standard was 15.2 parking stalls per 1,000 square feet. So that's a 5 times requirement of office or retail. So if you add restaurants, that really seems to be problematic. But again, that's all gonna have to blend with time of day, how much office, how much commercial. They might be able to get a small restaurant in, but as a base number, we're looking at 5 times the demand of office or retail.
Okay. Thank you. That's a great answer.
Thank you, Molly. Others? Jeff?
Planner Swaber, or Consultant Swaber, I have a question on the density being calculated. So if we're 21.28 on the units, how is the commercial space figured into that? Is there a mathematical equation?
Yeah, so apologize again. Residential is measured in density, which is units per acre. Commercial uses are measured by intensity in a floor area ratio. So how much floor area is on a certain amount of the lot. So as I discussed previously, right now their proposal is about a 60-40 split, about 40% commercial. It's about 100,000 square feet, so you would have about 40,000 square feet of the lot. You would take the gross, which is about, if I recall correctly, about 38,000 square feet of commercial. You'd end up with a floor area ratio somewhere in the neighborhood of 1. The zoning district allows up to 2, so their commercial intensity is well within range. But it's a similar rationale in that it's the amount of space compared to the amount of land it's sitting on, but it's
You're
a floor
saying that
area
at
ratio.
I think it's about 2.25 acres, right?
Yeah,
And we have 21.28 per acre. So that would be 42 plus another quarter, so 47, something like that, if it were the total lot.
there you go.
And so 30 divided by 4, so 2/3 of it is residential, 1/3 of it is commercial. Is that kind of how you're figuring that?
Yes, that's shown on the screen there.
Okay. Mezzanine is kind of a middle floor, right?
Actually, no. If it meets a standard of the less than 30%, occupying less than 30% of the square footage of the room, the building code specifically says it's not a floor.
But it is a separate level.
It's a separate level.
Okay. And what is community shared open space? I think the 2 and mini parks were classified as that.
So those are spaces that, the public can enter at any time. There's no gate, there's nobody watching those spaces to see whether it's a resident in the building or just somebody walking by.
So, okay, why isn't it considered public open space?
It is in the fact of, it's just treated differently than the landlord-controlled open space.
So it's because it's a common element and they need to maintain it,
Yes,
whereas the sidewalks are maintained by the city?
correct. That is correct. These are not parks.
Okay,
Can I add on to that?
sure.
Sorry, Mayor, just because there'd probably be a lot of questions. Is that the mass breaking areas?
The area in the blue, the landlord-controlled public open spaces, is the mass breaking area, the whole length of that mass break, and then the areas in front of the building that are between the building and the lot line.
Okay, so it's kind of the green space that's currently there today, the little gardens? If you look at the yellow that is on the
Yep.
rendering,
Yep,
we
the
kind of have
yellow-
green
the
space
yellow
right
on
there
the-
today.
Yep, the yellow on the east is what's there today. There is an easement, I think it's called a mini park easement, which is what's there today, right?
Is that, but it will always stay privately owned. And so is there potential that that could change to private only?
Not with the public easement over it. So it's, the underlying property is privately owned, but back with the TCF, we acquired an easement for public use in what was called a mini park.
Okay, thank you for that
don't
clarification. And the
Own it,
easement
but we
is,
have rights to it.
the easement's staying with this application?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me jump in.
No problem. I have one more question, and this might be something for the applicant. Trash and recycling, I noticed that was in one spot. Are there spots under each building for that, or how, is it a management thing to get the trash from A6 to A1?
I could answer the last part. It is the management's. I think the full function you will need to talk about with the applicant. But the only thing I would say, if we could go to the parking sheet, the 1-2 above, sheet 22. The parking stalls stop before the sidewalk line or the north part. So there's and you can see it more kind of to the east than the west. The property gets closer to the west. That's either being used by the building kind of dropping and being in the sidewalk line, but there's bicycle parking there, that area. There are areas within that underground parking stall, which are parking facilities that are not used for parking. So the applicant might be able to describe better how that's being used, but it's just pointing out it's not 100% used by parking stalls.
Okay,
That entire.
I'll ask the applicant, and it is safe to say that a semi, because of the ceiling height, cannot drive from the east end to the west end and get out, right?
There is no entrance or exit on the west end, but you are also correct that the
Oh, you're
ceiling
right,
height
right, yeah, okay.
does shrink or does get
So there is
shorter.
not a turnaround. All right, never mind, I got it. But is this, never mind, that's it, thank you. I'm finished.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Before we go to Councilmember Pleckish, I would just ask members of the audience, if you, I understand you probably have a lot of questions, a lot of points of clarification you're trying to work out with one another. It is difficult for us to hear staff and each other as those conversations are going on. So if you could please just kindly, if you're going to have conversations or ask each other questions, to just step outside momentarily, we would appreciate it. We're all trying to give our best attention to all the specifics, so thank you very much. All right, Councilmember Pleckish.
Madam Mayor, so I really just had one point of clarification. Earlier on, you had a graphic or a slide that showed average grades and average heights of roof lines and so on, which to me, at least, it seemed like it was exceeding certain limits. And yet later, you talked about how the height did not require a variance and it was in the approved PUD. I'm a little bit unclear about that. So could you go and compare and contrast those two thoughts?
Yep, absolutely. I'm going to do the 2 clicks to get both the lines. The code only cares about the yellow line and the red line. It doesn't care about the other sides. As you can see there are portions of the roof and portions of those chimneys that are above that red line. In the yellow line, which is the average grade plane, there are parts of the building that are below that yellow line, and then there are parts of the building that are above the yellow line. The code says we need to determine these 2 lines, so whatever the distance is the building height, regardless if there are elements above or below those lines. So appearance is one thing, but they are meeting the code, and therefore there is no variance or deviation needed.
Okay. Because it would appear on these pictures that at least part of that building doesn't meet the code, just by appearance sake.
Right,
But in actuality, if you measure it, it does meet the code. Am I correct then?
you're correct in
Right,
both.
thank you.
statements.
That's all I had.
One of those elusive measurements that, I don't know. I'm glad you guys are here to explain it. Okay. I have one quick question for staff at this moment, and that's with regard, to follow up on Councilmember Parkhill and Iverson's questions with open space. That does not include any of our existing sidewalks, correct? That's not in the calculation?
So there's a 3-foot sidewalk easement on the existing property, which is going to be maintained. So the 3 foot of sidewalk that is located on their property does count as open space.
That's the sidewalk we put in?
Correct.
Okay, so 3 feet of that. So if we were to remove that, because that's existing, right? That's not net new, open space. How would that change the numbers potentially? You said it's over 1,000 feet times 3, that's 3.
I don't know
At
that it
3,000 square
would if they keep their current design. They have publicly accessible hardscape from their building to
Sure.
the sidewalk. If we move the sidewalk line and they keep the same design where it's a publicly accessible hardscape all the way to our sidewalk, the blue number there of the landlord-controlled public open space would likely remain the same. It just would now be privately owned without a public easement on it, but the landlord, the applicant, the landlord is committing to, and that is a requirement of the Shoreland PUD CUP, that they have this publicly accessible open space. We talked about with the planning commission, if this project were to go forward, there would need to be a legal document, be it through an easement or development agreement or something, that would make this exhibit act as shown here, that space would be publicly available in perpetuity.
Okay. So to get further clarification here. Which of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 designated open space areas are free and open to any member of the public going and sitting down, enjoying, walking without interruption?
The top one, the landlord-controlled public open space in blue,
Okay?
the public open space in green, which happens to be the sidewalk, the very thin line, and the yellow, the common shared open space. The pink is the south side of cores A5 and A6, which are the residential units.
Sure.
There would be walls on the sides of those buildings, and those would basically be patios for those residential units. The purple areas to the south of cores 1, 2, 3, and 4 will act the same way, except for the commercial spaces instead of residences.
Okay.
So of that total amount, that's 10,000, a little more, about 15,000 of that is not available to the general public. If they just showed up there, should this development be approved, they cannot get to those spaces. All the rest of them, with the approval that would require that easement or development agreement, those other 3 spaces would be available to anybody that walked on site.
And is the proposal to remove the sidewalk and the trail that we installed?
There are 2 areas where it will be replaced. And one is in the location of the proposed access to the garage. And
Could
the
you
other
zoom-
one is,
Could you zoom in on that? This is really small for me to see.
next one. Yeah, there, right there. So the driveway locations are in different locations now. So when they install this driveway, they will remove what's there today and replace it with what's shown. Now, there are 2 existing other curb cuts in the development that will go away. Those will no longer have the curb cut, and the trail would be installed. On the very far west side, to allow for the construction of the foundation, they would be removing a part of the sidewalk and returning it to where it is today, but just when they're building the foundation, they would need to remove that to do the construction.
So on the north side of the property, adjacent to the sidewalk, what is measured as open space, is it, as I'm seeing it, a strip of grass next to the sidewalk? Or are there going to be benches? Is there going to be something to invite people that it is actually different than what exists currently?
Between or in front of the buildings, not within the public right-of-way.
Okay,
There are areas, because the building, there needs to be recesses per our design standards. There are recesses that will be created to the south of our existing sidewalk that are publicly accessible. So it won't be between our existing sidewalk and existing trail, but it will be directly south of our existing sidewalk that will add areas to sit and relax.
all right, perfect, thank you. Okay,
Can I ask one more on that topic?
yes, you may.
So just a quick note. Sat on the planning commission when Presbyterian Home came in front of us. And one of the developments in there was the regatta. And then, of course, the Great Lawn. At the time that it came in front of us at the planning commission, the Great Lawn was to remain a public space. At some point in this, soon after it left council and went into the city, it became the property of the regatta. And the regatta now manages the Great Lawn, which was supposed to be public space. If this moves forward, how do we as a city ensure that those public-private spaces that are listed in the blue remain that way, so that if a tenant comes in, they can't say, I want this to be private and not public? I want to make sure that we are legally protecting that space, that it remains public at all times. And so I want that to go on record, that if it does move forward, that they are to remain as a condition, without any change at any point, a public space, privately owned. So it's a statement, not a question.
Okay, thank you.
Council Member Iverson, all that I would state is the Planning Commission report and recommendation shares that and has that as a recommendation. Should that residential shoreland PUD, CUP move forward, all that shown in blue, green, and yellow be public open space in perpetuity.
Yep, I'm just going on record that I've heard that before, and it changed.
Okay, well, we can, if we get to that point, we'll make sure to address that fully. All right, I would like to invite the applicant to come forward, please. Good evening. If you could please introduce yourselves with your name and address.
David Nims with Hobson Black Architects, 100 North State Street, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
And Sam Dio with the Cross Castle Law Firm, Washington Avenue in Minneapolis.
Excellent, thank you.
And I'll,
Who will be presenting this evening?
We'll both be taking parts of it, if that's okay.
Okay. As long, I would just have a couple of requests. If you could each take turns directly into the microphone so that folks who are watching, our vast viewing audience likes to be able to hear everybody's comments. And then also, I think staff had indicated, we're going to look at about 10 minutes. If we go a little bit over, that's fine. We want you to make sure that you can get your points across. However, if we start to get into the 20 to 30 minutes, I might give you the
Sure.
high sign, the hook.
That's
If
fair.
you remember that show. Okay, so please, take it away.
This is just, to remind everybody the guiding principles and the vision set forth in the comprehensive plan, because these are really everything that guided all the decisions that were made when we went forward with this project. Being a good steward of the lake is really a big part of that, and there's a lot of things that need to happen on the site, but as staff stated and is in the report, a rezoning needs to happen in order to perform the work for the stormwater management, et cetera, in order to control the contaminants that are on the site and prevent them from running to the lake as they do today. When we talk about community engagement with the site, right now, it's an abundance of asphalt for the majority of it. And the proposal before you today looks at transforming that into a more vibrant mix of uses. And all those uses, as staff said, will be directly accessible from the sidewalk, even given the grade differences that occur across the length of the site. We've gone to great lengths to drop those floor areas so everyone can come directly in, so there's no barriers to anybody on here. And furthering that, as we discussed, there's like 3 curb cuts that are being removed from the site to enhance pedestrian safety as they traverse along those trails and encourage that connectedness. That also is something that, per the SRF traffic report, looks at a net positive benefit to traffic in the entire area. That mix of uses is all going to be supported by these massing breaks. These massing breaks they're 25 feet, which is the requirement at the narrowest point, so where those building masses step together. But they step out to the south and they step out to the north to actually a break of 42 feet 8 inches as you approach the street. You can see here there's street walls that creating layering of activity spaces and seating, behind the sidewalk, above the wall, to try and create that really habitable, walkable, pedestrian-friendly experience as you go down. We're doing all these things while, as staff said, hitting the density requirements that have been laid forth in those comprehensive plans. Another thing we'd like to point out, that the comprehensive plan gives guidance on providing a range of unit sizes to appeal to a broader audience, and that's something that we're trying to achieve with this project at this stage. Parking and traffic. It was a very focused conversation at Planning Commission. We worked with great input from staff on understanding certain requirements that allow the adjustment through the CUP to a result of 134 spaces being required and giving us that 8 surplus. We did provide staff for reference based on the Planning Commission conversations, a variety of mixes of uses that will comply with the 142 spaces that we provided with the joint use parking facility agreement. And one thing further on that point, in our traffic study and concurred with the SRF traffic report that the city had done, based on ITE standards, they're looking at our peak demand, we'll have a surplus of 45 spaces based on the Institute of Traffic Engineers analysis and how they do analysis throughout the country. That's what they would see as being the surplus. And really, last but not least, the charm of the building. We went through great lengths to try to capture that spirit and look that Wayzata is after, and I think that was really well received at the Planning Commission, that we're getting to those goals, that we're meeting that character and vision, and it's all kind of capped by this rotunda element at the end to really soften that transition to the city and provide 180-degree views of the lake.
Thanks a lot. Again, Sam Dio, on behalf of Lake West. Sorry. I'm going to more directly address the recommendations of denial in the Planning Commission's report and recommendation. And there's, I don't want to knock the Planning Commission. They spent a significant amount of time on this. They worked through a lengthy application, and there's a number of requests here. But there were 2 significant difficulties and problems that need to be corrected by the council with respect to the report and recommendation. Both the recommendation of denial with respect to rezoning as well as the recommendation of denial with respect to the joint parking CUP, are at odds with the applicable standards that are set forth in the city code and the priorities in the city's comprehensive plan. So with respect to the rezoning, the concerns that were raised by the Planning Commission related to two different boxes. One was concerns about the size, scale, and density with respect to the standards set forth in the comprehensive plan. The other was parking and loading and traffic issues that were also the same issues that were discussed in the report and recommendation with respect to the recommendation of denial regarding the joint parking CUP. So I'm going to deal with those issues separately, but they're related in that there was a departure from the standards that are actually codified in the city code and the priorities and policies that are set forth in the comprehensive plan. So with respect to the issue related to the size, scale, and density of the project, the council's aware of the difference, obviously, between the comprehensive plan and the zoning code. The comprehensive plan sets forth the high-level policies, and then those policies are implemented through the zoning code. And as you're all aware from applying that code to numerous projects, size, scale, and density are all issues that are addressed in the code rather than the comprehensive plan. So for example, height, setbacks, the density of a project, all of those are zoning code issues. So with respect to the rezoning at issue here in the comprehensive plan, the comprehensive plan guides this property as central business district. I always want to say something different besides. So central business district, there are three potential ordinance districts that comply with that, the C4, C4A, and C4B zoning district. The C4A district is what this property was zoned before it became a PUD, and the PUD was created to depart from the height requirements with respect to the current TCF building that's there. So that building currently, and the property is currently in limbo. So it can't be changed from the 1989 plans. The PUD contract that was executed as part of the approval of the PUD requires that the same plans that were in effect in 1999 and the property was built, it can't be changed without action by this council. And so, for example, with respect to correcting the fact that there's no stormwater management on the property now, and untreated stormwater is running into Lake Minnetonka, we can't fix that. We can't do anything to redevelop the property until there's a new change in the zoning. So looking back at these issues, learning from its experience with the council through previous applications, Lake West looked at the comprehensive plan and realized that C4A was the zoning that applied to the property before. It's consistent with the comprehensive plan. That's in the staff report as well, and staff can confirm. And so clearly, the requirements of the C4A district with respect to size, scale, or density are all consistent with the comprehensive plan, and yet the Planning Commission found otherwise. Then when we look at the parking issues, I want to kind of address those issues more specifically. The comprehensive plan specifically addresses three different issues with respect to the parking and movement of traffic on the property. So in the commercial goals and priorities of the comprehensive plan, the plan states to examine the placement of parking within developments so it is not a focal point, but rather placed behind buildings with appropriate buffers and landscapings. So the difficulty that we ran into at the Planning Commission was that, for example, a planning commissioner was concerned that there was not surface parking, that we were moving from surface parking to underground parking. But Lake's West focus has been on the priorities of the comprehensive plan, which require us to conceal the parking and place it behind the building rather than as a outward surface issue. And then this goal is particularly important, obviously, with respect to the joint parking facility. The comprehensive plan requires the council to consider promotion of joint parking facilities within a development wherever possible. So a joint parking facility is possible here. The staff report confirms that a joint parking facility works. Obviously, there's any number of mixes of uses with respect to any joint parking facility that could exceed the parking requirements of the code. So we could have 10 restaurants, and obviously we'd exceed the code. But staff and the applicant have worked at length to go through numerous different iterations of mixes of uses. So there's several specific iterations that we've gone through that show that there are anywhere from 8 excess spaces to the correct amount of spaces. So it's clear from the calculations and the actual requirements of the code that a joint parking facility is possible. And so whether the Planning Commission prefers surface parking, finds it hard to find, as you see on page 8, there was a comment about that it's difficult to find. I think those issues are in conflict with the comprehensive plan itself and the goals and priorities that are there. And obviously, our focus and obviously the council's focus needs to be on compliance with the comprehensive plan. We talked about this briefly as well. The priority is to, in the plan, is to consolidate access to streets and off-street parking from commercial developments wherever possible. And we go from 4 entrances off of Lake Street to 1. So again, that's meeting the requirements of the comprehensive plan and the goals of the plan with the specific parking provided here that meets the standards of the code. This is the SRF traffic study that the city engaged SRF to conduct to review the traffic study that was provided by the applicant. So ultimately, 3 engineers have looked at this, have looked at parking, loading, and traffic at the property. The applicant's engineer that we submitted our report initially, SRF was engaged by the city to provide an independent review of that. And then the city engineer reviewed the analysis that was provided by the 2 traffic engineers. So what did SRF, the independent engineer, find? If we go to page 2 of their report, the actual engineers, traffic engineers who looked at the property, found that there would not be any delay or queuing issues, and no mitigation with respect to traffic is necessary for this project. Again, the independent traffic engineer found that the reduced access along Lake Street, that's the elimination of additional accesses, so going from 4 to 1 in terms of accesses to the property, that's a net benefit for the study area, being the area in which the project's proposed. Again, the parking analysis, the independent SRF traffic engineer engaged by the city to review our traffic engineer's report concurred and found that the expected demand of spaces was correct. Similarly, the parking demand estimates are accurate, and there is expected to be sufficient parking to accommodate the proposed development and potential public surplus, meaning there could be potential public uses using the parking facility in addition to the uses at the property itself. Our traffic engineers' conclusions were accurate. No mitigation is necessary, meaning there's no issues to address with respect to parking, loading, traffic on the street. Similarly, our study appeared to be accurately and correctly done. No significant issues were found. So, let's go back there. So, the issue is, obviously the Planning Commission had questions and concerns, but with respect to the specific standards and the actual facts on the ground, there's no dispute in the evidence before the council on what needs to be done with respect to a joint parking facility, which must be provided whenever it's possible, according to the comprehensive plan. And with respect to loading, we heard questions and concerns. And I should add that the city engineer and Mr. Swebber put up the comments from the city engineer. The city engineer had no concerns. He only wanted to remind that unloading couldn't be done on the street. But that's obviously why the code has a requirement for a truck semi-loading area as well as a delivery loading area, and that's what's provided. So the application meets the standards, and with respect to a CUP, then the law requires that it be granted. With respect to rezoning, the comprehensive plan is clear that this property is guided central business district. C4A is allowed and consistent with the comprehensive plan there. And there's no evidence to the contrary with respect to the standards, because as you look at the other portions of the application, which are the application of the specific standards of the CUPs required and the design standards, all of the design standards are met. Obviously, there's different choices that an applicant could make. There's different choices that the council could have made in adopting its ordinance. But the council's made those choices. The council spent, obviously, I'm sure many of you are aware of how much time was spent on the comprehensive plan. That's a document that the city spends significant time developing. And so we're required, we as the applicant are required to follow those standards, and so is the planning commission. And I think the information and evidence before the council is clear that we met all the applicable standards, and so that would require the council to approve the applications.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you both to stay there just in the event that we have any questions for you. Anybody else from your team, Mr. Fretham, anybody wish to speak? Okay. Questions of the applicant? No? If you don't mind, just hanging out there for a minute because something may come back to you. Is the document that's referenced by the applicant's counsel, the SRF review document, is that in our packet? I don't remember where that was. And then while you're looking for that, with regard to,
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
sorry,
that's quite all
not to jump in line here, but it's at pages 300. It's kind of oddly at the end, not to.
okay,
It's at 335 to 337
perfect.
of the 380 odd pages.
Yes, thank you. This is one of our shorter packets, actually. All right, I should have noted that. In terms of the buildings, Councilmember Plekish, do you not? Okay, here. We can share. Oh, you got it. So we have 6 cores, correct? Do we have renderings for all 6? How will, from a procedural standpoint, again, if this were to move forward, is there a design review anticipated if this moves ahead? Materials evaluated by council? Explain to us how that process typically works, because there's a lot there.
That is the 6th requirement. So the 6th request, the design review. The staff report goes into detail about those materials.
But we don't have renderings for each of the 6 buildings. Do
We
we?
have elevations both north and south of each building, and I
Okay.
am going to double check, but I believe that we do have all of them. It may be that we have parts of one and the full of the other, but the renderings are on pages, they start on 293.
I think 283, we start to see renderings in the
283,
packet.
and then,
The elevations, including building materials and transparency, start on 277 and go through 283, sorry. Then 284 begins the renderings. The first one is Core A1. Then Core A2 is on 286.
I don't know about everybody else, but not all of my pages are numbered, so I'm counting. You might have to slow down. Oh, my goodness.
I know,
I'm
it's
going to
really
need
tiny.
stronger readers, I'm afraid. Okay. So all buildings, all elevations are captured.
Yes, basically between page 292 at the end and going back.
Okay. So then,
272, 277 through 292.
Okay.
There are some elements of the design review which, discuss undulations or breakups of the massing that are in the floor plans before that. But
Okay.
elevations and renderings are on those pages.
Thank you, that's helpful. Parking, I had something about parking and traffic. I'd like feedback from staff. We had a lot of numbers thrown at us. I just need really clear, hear me out. What they're proposing, with the current use that they're proposing, and the number they're short. And I think I heard 16 when staff was presenting.
From, without the CUP, the two uses added together, 158, they're providing 142, so that's the 16 difference
Without the CUP,
without the CUP.
okay. With the CUP, can you break it down that?
With the CUP, there are a variety of mixes that may even include a small restaurant. That would be a mix of a small restaurant, 1,500 square feet, retail office that may work, and then there's a lot of mixes that wouldn't.
And
So
I
that's
would-
a we don't know.
Right,
with
and I
the
would just
CUP.
add, this application just calls for office at this time, so if the applicant wanted to change uses over time, we would have to amend that CUP formally with Planning Commission and Council.
Okay, so as we know it, short 16. Applicant spoke with regard to, it looked like there were different numbers presented. I would like staff's assessment of what they presented and where are we divergent on our points of view? 'Cause these should be pretty straightforward calculations, correct?
Correct. I would like to address it in 3 points.
Okay.
The first, the number that is referred to that the SRF engineer looked at comes from the Institute of Transportation Engineers. That is not the city code's parking requirements. That is the ITE's parking requirements. So it's apples to oranges. One example is ITE allows 1.25 parking stalls per residential unit. So their report says they're only required to have 40 parking stalls for the residential. Our code is 2 parking stalls per unit. Our code doesn't even consider the different bedrooms. You know, of the number of bedrooms, we have 5 that are 1 bedroom, we have 15 that are 2, we have 10 that are 3. We did not recommend going down to 1.25. It doesn't make sense on the ground that somebody that has a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom unit is expecting to only have 1.25 stalls. So apples to oranges. The engineer could look at the ITE manual and say whatever they want about the ITE manual. We are using the city code. So
Okay.
that's all I'd say, apples to oranges. Another point, which was brought up by one of the planning commissioners, and the standards are included in the back of the staff report, for the joint facility CUP, the 6th subpoint A is proximity. The building or use for which an application is being made to utilize the off-street parking facility provided by another building or use shall be located within 300 feet of such parking facilities. So I don't know that we could do, like a point on the screen, but farthest west, you see a square that is both blue and pink. That is the elevator for core A6. There are parking stalls all the way down to the end of core A2. There cannot be any reserved residential parking stalls because this is a mixed, a joint use facility. So if the parking stall available for a person who lives in core A6 happens to be that parking stall all the way down in A4, that's about 740 feet. So not having the ability to have some dedicated stalls can result in people who are more than 300 feet from their building in this joint use facility. So that's a requirement of the code. That was pointed out by a planning commissioner at the public hearing and was included in the PC report recommendation. Then the final one, the PC, or the memo attached by the applicant and the memo supplied by SRF does not address loading. It addresses counts. How many trips are in the road, how often are these spaced out? So the conclusions there are accurate when you're looking at how many trips are generated for this site. It doesn't address loading and how that truck gets in and out of the site. So those would be, I guess, my 3 points about what the Planning Commission actually looked at and how the code applies it that may be different than what these 3 different engineers looked at.
Gotcha. You bring up the code and distance here that we're talking about for this project. We don't have anything in our code with regard to ingress and egress from a parking garage that's this long.
We don't.
It seems like a danger, right? If you have a fire on the far eastern end, you're parked, or you're over on the far western end and you're trying to get out and you only have one way to get out. How do we address that?
So there's a number of measures that are included in the fire code and the building code that would come into play, but it's egress for people getting out. There's air handling, other things that all happen to be, but we don't have in our code that the maximum length of a parking.
Could you speak just a little bit closer to the microphone?
The maximum length of a parking lot is this long. There's other code requirements that come in, such as the joint facility, that you shouldn't expect an occupant of a building to be walking more than 300 feet to where they're parking.
Sure. Okay. No, thank you. And my final question for the moment is maybe best answered by the applicant. You mentioned a couple of times that the existing property is under a PUD, and it's currently zoned as a PUD. Previous applications that came before the Planning Commission and the council were for PUD amendments, I believe. Am I correct in that statement, or am I miswording that?
I think we were looking at a brand-new PUD.
A brand new
Most cases, yes.
Okay. Could you, instead of a PUD amendment, could you help us understand the shift in the type of zoning that you're looking for? And
Yeah, I think that this is where the interplay between the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance and the zoning map is really important. The previous applications obviously weren't successful. And the difficulty with the PUD is there can be sort of amorphous standards. I think that's, in some ways, that's the point, right? If there's this use and this use and this use and 3 properties that need to be together that would never be together in the code, but, you know, the gas station, go-kart track and whatever is going to be awesome, you know, it can be done through PUD. But it's ultimately not as consistent with the comprehensive plan than the specific guidance that's provided in the plan. So Central Business District is what it's guided. And so moving that plan from a PUD, which is sort of a one-off, in this case for the TCF Bank building, to just basic consistency with the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance that that codifies the comprehensive plan's priorities is always consistent with the plan. And Minnesota courts have found it to be arbitrary and capricious not to approve such a zoning, because it just says, if the guidance and the comprehensive plan matters, then, and we're just asking to apply that specifically, so move from a one-off approval to the specific guidance provided in the plan, the central business district, then there can't be any inconsistency with the plan, obviously. And so the idea was, rather than try to guess what priorities might apply, let's just ask the council and the city to apply the standards that it's already prioritized in the ordinance. And that's all that we're asking to do in this application, is just to apply the standards and priorities of the plan. And so that's why the change, and that's why the application is simplified. That's why we spent, months and months working with staff to try to figure out how to accomplish that and to ensure that we're meeting all those standards.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Can I address the traffic issue that was?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So there's a couple issues that need to be clarified, I think. So first of all, with respect to the traffic engineers, these are the traffic engineers that have spoken to this project. I'm not a traffic engineer. I'm sure council members aren't either. And the IT numbers and their analysis with respect to traffic is not arbitrary. It's science and evidence-based. Obviously, the city can set different priorities that are different than what the traffic engineer would find. But those standards aren't just arbitrary. Those are scientifically, what traffic will this produce and will it be a problem? And unequivocally, SRF, the city's engineer, our engineer, and the city engineer concurred that there's no issues. With respect to loading, the city has decided what is required for loading. And again, we've applied and provided loading areas that are required by the code. And if loading was an issue, if loading were a significant concern, it would have been an issue that one of the traffic engineers or the city could have tasked SRF with reviewing. But it wasn't a priority because we're complying with the code. The city's already reviewed that issue, set a standard, and we're complying with that standard. And with respect to the mix of uses and the joint parking facility, we provided a calculation with the application that shows that we meet the standard, that in fact there are 8 extra spaces if office and residential uses are provided and the joint facility is shared. Or if the joint facility is approved, excuse me. And so we meet that standard. We've actually provided alternative calculations based on different mixes of uses that would also be required. Those aren't included in the packet. They're not there, but we've discussed those with staff, and staff can confirm that we've explained that there are different uses that are available. But to be clear, we cannot, under the code, provide a mix of uses that doesn't comply with the code standards. We can't put in 10 restaurants that aren't going to have sufficient parking under the code, and that's just something that's true of any joint parking facility. So there are always going to be a mix of uses that won't work, and there always will be a mix of uses that does work, and that's what we've provided, and that's what we're required to be restricted to unless we come back for an amendment to the CUP. So that's not an issue either. We comply with the code standards, and any sort of different or change in mix of uses down in the future is something that's inherent to any joint parking CUP. The same is true with respect to any shared parking facility and the distance. If you look at the plan for the parking, there's different accesses all along. There's how many? 6 accesses to the place, so there's many alternative accesses. It's certainly a safe design. And parking in any venue is going to naturally sort of be divided between different areas based on the different entries. If I want to go into the entrance at Core 6, I'm going to park near Core 6, and vice versa. It's going to naturally divide itself. There are other controls that could be put in place if it became an issue, but it's not, because that's something that's inherent to any shared space, right? You go to the mall, there's space more than 300 feet away, and there's space closer, and you're going to park where it's closer unless there's not a space available. And that's just the way shared parking works, and it's inherent to the joint parking facilities that the city's prioritized and said are must be considered if it's possible, and it's possible here.
Any comments about the delivery vehicles, specifically semis, large delivery vehicles that do not have a mechanism to turn around within the parking facility and would need to either back in or back out?
So we don't anticipate that there's going to be, there may not be any need for semi-use, or there may not be a significant use. So this it's not going to be concerned just as a practical matter.
How about moving in, moving out? That would,
So
we would anticipate.
I would anticipate that there's going to be very few tenants that are going to require a semi-truck to move into a condo, right? I mean, these are, given the scale and size, it seems unlikely.
You met our residents?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's not possible, but that's something, so this is something, there are our requirements that are required of semi-truck use, and then there are also, that's something that's anticipated by the city code. The city code has said there needs to be one semi-size parking area for a property or a development such as this, and we've met that standard. The city hasn't determined that any sort of additional standard is necessary. There's lots of times when there's room to safely ingress and egress a semi-truck onto Lake Street. Obviously, it just needs to be at the right time of day. And so those standards can be incorporated, and the city engineer talked about specific standards with respect to loading and didn't raise any concern with respect to this issue. So again, you know, if the parking engineers weighed in and said there's a problem, then there might be a problem. But the people that know the traffic and know that there's not, have reviewed this and determined that there's not going to be queuing issues or other safety issues with respect to the parking ingress and egress.
In terms of, I believe the question was asked at the Planning Commission, and that was when it went before them. Conversations, agreements with BNSF, the railroad company, in terms of the proposal and what is anticipated, the activity that's anticipated to occur on the site?
Yeah, that's a positive, I guess another positive development in between the Planning Commission and now. We were able to get in contact with and meet with, the applicant was able to meet with BNSF and discuss the project. They're reviewing the project. We haven't heard any concerns and didn't hear anything at that meeting that would cause any impediment or problem with respect to the project. Obviously, they're our neighbor and they matter, and safety matters when we talk about trains, obviously. So if an issue comes up, we'll deal with it, but we have an open line of communication, and that's positive, and they haven't raised any concerns.
Well, hats off for getting an appointment with BNSF, because that has not always been an easy task. So congratulations on that. We look forward to hearing what they have to say. Okay, thank you very much. I'll ask you to take your seats. We do have a couple members of the public who would like to speak. Pardon me for not talking into the microphone.
Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you very much. All right. So just a quick reminder before we get to public comments. We do have a number of letters, both for and opposed to the project in our packets. The council has had an opportunity to review those. So if since we only have two people, I don't think we'll run into this issue, but we just ask that, you know, if you have new information to share, if you haven't provided a letter, please feel free to come forward and speak. If somebody before you has shared some of your thoughts and you just want to affirm those, we'd ask that you do that rather than repeat what the person before you has maybe said. And then, just as a reminder also, we ask that you limit comments to 3 minutes. So with that, we'll go ahead and begin. And our first member of the public this evening who would like to speak is Ms. Lindsay Basham. Another just a quick reminder of procedure. So the public hearing is actually held at the Planning Commission. This is not officially a public hearing, but in Wayzata, we do like to give folks the opportunity to voice their opinion on a project. And so we welcome all points of view, and Ms. Basham will let you kick things off.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. I'm Lindsay Basham at 461 PV Lane, Wayzata. Well, here we are again, but the real question is why we are here again. Tonight's applicant has submitted many prior applications that were reviewed by the Planning Commission and actually presented when I was on the Planning Commission. Several of the proposals were sent on to City Council with unanimous recommendations for denial, which were absolutely upheld by City Council with unanimous denials every time. Parking was and still is a problem. I've had a chance to study all of the proposals, and I stand here tonight as a Wayzata resident to support Resolution 35-2023 for denying rezoning CUPs for the joint parking and the first floor multiple family dwellings, the shoreland PUD/CUP, and the SIP/CUP, and project design located at 200 Lake Street East. The developer continues to present projects perhaps too large for this unique and extremely narrow parcel, always with inadequate parking. So now it's a different scheme, changing zoning districts and not allowing assigned parking in favor of shared parking. Why? Because there is not enough condo parking to be squeezed underground, along with retail, commercial parking, and various moving and delivery vehicles going in and out, in and out. To suggest that this unrealistic and ill-suited parking plan is to expect a condo owner would be pleased to return home with no accessible parking spot, maybe after a quick trip to the grocery store with a couple of kids, maybe melting ice cream in the trunk with their groceries. Well, where should they park? They need to address parking with common sense, practical application on what's best for this unique parcel of land for our community. So once again, I support another denial for this project tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Basham. Next up this evening, we have Mr. Charlie Devine. If you could please introduce yourself with your name and address.
My name is Charlie Devine. I live at 14260 43rd Avenue North in Plymouth. And the reason why I'm here is I do business in Wayzata, and I enjoy coming to your city often. I'm also a former mayor. I was the mayor of City of Afton on the St. Croix for 2 terms, and I've been watching this application. I've gone to a lot of the meetings. And, you know, one of the things that has not come up in the process of this is there was one application made back in February. And the city initially rejected that application, and the applicant said, no, you can't reject it based on these elements. And the city came back and said, yeah, you're right, we're not going to reject it. You don't have to change the application. And what they said on the 24th was a new application was submitted with this letter contesting that. And the city basically rescinded the rejection on the 24th. Unfortunately, the state statute, 1599, and I dealt with it a lot, is the 60-day rule, which can be extended to 120 days. But the city doesn't have the right to stop that clock unless it requires a change in the application, which didn't happen. So technically speaking, the city's always acknowledged that it was the February 10th application. The applicant never put in another application after February 10th. Therefore, the clock started on February 10th and never stopped. And what that does is it says that the 120 days, if I did my calculation correctly, was the 9th. And, you know, I only bring it up because it was, I thought it was always going to be acted on at the last meeting. But the city doesn't have the authority to stop that clock unless they require a change to the application, which they did not. And I'm just bringing it up. I know staff may want to try to disagree with it, But the one thing the League of Minnesota Cities always hounded on us when I went through all those classes, and our city attorney, you can't mess with the 60-day rule, which in this case is the 120-day rule. But the clock ran out on the 9th of this month, and I'm just bringing it up, not saying good guy, bad guy, or whatever. Don't shoot the messenger, but I would look at that closely because in my estimation, and I've talked to a number of people, that clock ran out on the 9th of this month. So I'm just putting it out as a point of order. I appreciate what you do. I know what you're doing is very difficult, and I thank you for having a wonderful city for a lot of people to visit. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to, because that's an important statement that Mr. Devine just made, perhaps we can address that with regard to the 60 or the 120-day rule and the city's position with regard to that.
Madam Mayor?
Because we would have saved ourselves a lot of time.
Yeah, for sure. Madam Mayor, I think it's, the deadline for the 120 days is the 3rd or the 5th of July?
Yes, it's the 5th of July, so I'm still trying to pull up the documents right now to verify the dates, but I know we're also given 15 business days after an application is submitted to deem it complete too. So I just recall at the time we were trying to work with the applicant to get more information submitted.
Sure.
They decided they did not want to do that.
Okay.
And Madam Mayor, that's been reiterated to the applicant many times, so we're confident in that. That's been well understood, and that is the date.
Okay. All right, thank you. So the next, yes, we have Miss Becky Pearson.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, council members, staff. Up here again. This time I'm here as Becky Pearson, the president of the Greater Wayzata Area Chamber of Commerce. Just very quickly, I had submitted an email to all of you that I just mentioned last week, and I appreciate your consideration and reading of that. I want to be respectful of process. The only difference that I want to mention is that I had been asked, was this my perception or was this something more official from the chamber? So I just wanted to share that we did have a chamber board meeting today, and we talked about this topic. And I quickly I showed them, they've seen the email that I had sent, and I quickly walked through some of those major highlight points that this is a large section of the West End that has been vacant for, we're looking at probably 8 years, and probably will be 10 years by the time we get some approvals taken. We have had several developers that have tried to develop this very difficult lot and have failed and given up, and it feels like this proposal has continued to evolve and hope to try to get to something that is acceptable. The west end of the Lake Street has been divided for a number of years, and this development would provide an opportunity to get more residents and businesses down on that end. I am hearing from some new businesses in town that foot traffic is a little bit lighter on the west end. So I'm looking at this not at a detail level, but a very kind of larger corridor perspective. And I would say that the board felt that none of us are experts in this type of a development. It's very complex and challenging. We don't expect to know that. We leave that to the city and to our developers to take a look at that and sort it out. But I certainly had 100% support that we really hope that we don't allow perfection to get in the way of what it seems like strong, attractive, scaled projects at a critical and very challenging site, and hope that you together would exhaust every aspect that you can to try to bring this application to approval and completion, however you can do that. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Pearson. The last form that I have here is Mike Palm.
Good evening, Mike Palm at 121 Grove Lane East. I want to start off by the email that I sent to you all was in all caps, and it looks like I was like screaming it was bold caps, so I apologize for it appearing that I was, but, that's one way to discern between, small lettering and large. So anyway, I want to apologize. I also get a little fired up, and we're well beyond that, because I think Planning Commission did a very good job of taking what was before it and narrowing down what they felt were key issues and actually approving some of the key issues. So I think they did a good job of culling down to where we are today. And because one of the big issues was, which I brought up maybe a year ago, is when you state that the plazas are 6 feet and there's no view from the sidewalk, there is no view from the sidewalk now. And I can tell you that I'm probably, my wife and I and our Bernese Mountain Dog are probably the #1 Wayzata resident that overlooks and views and enjoys the lagoon and Lake Minnetonka walking. I mean, we live on Grove Lane, and that view is the best there is. So what the applicant has done here by creating, and we've worked for 2-3 years, or you've all worked 2-3 years on this project, to think that you would not approve a rezoning back to C4 when the CUP, the TCF building, and those parking lots, that's not what that property deserves, and that's not what Wayzata deserves. It deserves what we've all worked hard and provided, and what they've responded to, and what all the input from planning and from you all on creating charm, character, and a beautiful project that will mirror what's on the north side, but that also brings those plazas of 25 to 42 feet, there's 5 of them, that overlook the most gorgeous view, I would say, in the country, of an inland water view overlooking that lagoon and Wayzata Bay. You're adding 5 public viewing plazas. If you look at that square footage, you're doubling what you have there now. If you take the depot, if you take those little sitting areas along the Panaway, if you take the little fire pit areas, those small little areas, this is adding double that to the public. Thousands of people will enjoy those views, where now with the TCF building, you have 0. So I can't even imagine that the zoning that you could possibly, as council, make a decision to not allow this to revert to C4, because the TCF building and those parking lots are not the PUD, and so you have to change it anyway. So why not just go back to the C4, as the attorney and the legal counsel has said, and because the standards are already there. You've already gone through all the work in the comp plan, so just revert to C4, and then we can get into the other details. And finally, as far as the parking, in reading the engineering, it doesn't look like there's any increased traffic that this is going to cause to the traffic counts and to the engineering results, their study on Lake Street. I also think there's room, you have to go back and look, that they could dedicate a parking stall to each of these units. I think they could dedicate a stall, and I think that would make a big difference. For each of those units, 30 units, to have one dedicated for the resident, and then maybe another floater for the guest. I don't know if that can be done, but I think it's a gorgeous project. You've worked too hard to get it to this character, charm, and those plazas for public purpose, and it deserves to be rezoned or reverted back to C4. It's not the PUD that the TCF building sits on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Palm. Question for staff. In terms of the assignment of spaces, did I hear correctly, we don't allow that in our code, or that's not what's proposed? I was a little unclear between the different statements.
The code requires that if you're sharing parking stalls, and as they submitted, all the stalls are shared. None of them are dedicated.
Meaning shared between the condo and the mixed use?
Yep.
So within the mixed.
One 142 parking stall joint facility. All 142 stalls need to be available to all uses. If they wanted a different mix, if they wanted to dedicate some and then do joint and others, they need to tell us how many is joint, but that's not the application in front of us.
Correct, okay. No, thank you, that's helpful to understand. All right. City Manager, do we have anybody on Zoom with any comments?
Madam Mayor, we do not.
Okay, thank you. Well, seeing we have no further public comment on this matter, I will bring it back to the council for discussion. And who would like to go first?
Mayor, could I ask one more clarifying question that's kind of burdening me through this whole application process is, we talked about semis having to back out of the loading and unloading, which does seem like kind of a rarity. I can get behind and understand, but I am still not clear if it's like UPS trucks and FedEx trucks, the bigger trucks that come every single day, you know, to all the buildings. Will those have to be backed out as well? I mean, it doesn't seem like there's enough room to turn around.
We're going to bring up that rendering, but it does appear that there's enough for your typical Amazon box truck.
Yeah, Amazon tends to be a little bit a smaller one, but like the big brown UPS trucks and those big FedEx ground trucks, you know, as a business owner on Lake Street, they come to pretty much every single business every day. So those would be, and it's right in the middle of the afternoon.
Yep. So within the garage, on the far left side, you have the parking and loading berth area where a vehicle like that would be. And then the only thing impeding it to the south is that trash and recycling area. You'll note that the parking lane goes at an angle there, so you get both the cross-hatched areas on the north and the south.
I'm sorry, it's really hard to hear you.
I'm sorry. We're looking at the two circles on the very left-hand side. The loading and berth area showed in gray, which is the red circle to the top. And then you see the trash and recycling area on the south. Those are the two physical features within this part of the loading area. You see that the parking lane, drive lanes, go at an angle there, and there's the crosshatched area both to the north and the south. That provides the area for the UPS truck to back up, do a three-point turn, and go out the same direction they came in.
In front of the trash and recycling. That's where, so they'll come in, scoot around.
Correct. But that would not afford the space necessary for a semi to do the same thing.
Right.
But your UPS vehicle should be able to make that movement.
Should. Do you think they would?
That's what it's designed for.
Can I add on to that, Mayor and Molly, if you're okay?
Yes.
It's been brought to my attention, and I don't know if this is a fact, that the UPS and the FedEx drivers are not allowed to back up for safety reasons. If you notice that the way the trucks pull in. And so that is what I have been told, that those vehicles are not allowed to back up. They either consistently make left-hand turns or right-hand turns, that their routes are designated so that they never have to turn up for liability reasons.
Okay. Other questions before we move on to council comments?
None for me, but thanks,
No?
Mayor.
Okay. Yes, please go ahead, Kathy.
This is a question for staff. Is the comprehensive plan driving the density on this? And the Met Council?
Rezoning needs to comply with the comprehensive plan, and the comprehensive plan calls for a density between 20 and 30 units an acre.
And is that being driven by the Met Council?
No,
It is not.
it is not. The Met Council would only requires you to have land uses available over 12 units an acre.
For this site?
The Metropolitan Council only has a minimum density required to meet the affordable housing requirement of 12 units an acre. It does not require you to go to 20.
Is the Met Council is a part of driving the increased density in Wayzata?
There is another mix that we have been talking with the Met Council with of, we are designated a suburban community, and all of our development over the decade between 2021 and 2030 has to average 5 units an acre. Almost like we were talking with the joint facilities, there's lots of ways to get to that mix. You know, there could be a lot of R1A development, even though we don't have a lot of land available that would make those. But there could be R1 developments, there could be R2 developments, there could be C4, C4A, C4B developments. We only have to have it be an overall average of 5.
Okay. The reason for my question is that in this application and the previous applications, density has come up multiple times from the residents. And I've been asked several times, why is the city not looking at changing that density requirement down on Lake Street to reflect more what the residents want? So,
Madam Mayor
it's a
and
very, yes.
Councilmember Iverson, just a comment. I would say that what's really driving it is the type of units. You could easily fit 20 units in one of those cores in most places, but it's really the size, and you know that they do their market research. That's what sells here. So I would say it's not the density; it's the type of unit that they're wanting to put on the market.
Okay. Thank you for that, Jeff. Thank you. I just wanted to ask that question because I was asked several times about that. So thank you for the clarification.
Jeff?
Are we requiring them to do a mixed use there with office and residential, or would 100% residential work?
If they rezoned this to C4A, 100% residential would not work. Residential uses on the first floor are allowed only by conditional use permit, and that conditional use permit standards includes can't be more than 50% of the floor area and can't front Lake Street.
Okay. And it is a PUD, and that's what it's zoned now. If we were 100%, if we went with the guidelines of 20 to 30 per acre, and we were 100% residential on a PUD, I'm estimating 2¼ acre, that would be 67 units, or at the current rate, 47 units if it was 21.28. And that parking would be, if it were 67, would be 134. So okay, so you answered my question that they could, if they were 100% residential, they could meet their parking requirements as is now.
The whole group of applications together, the 6 requests, one of those is the CUP for first floor residential.
Yeah.
100% residential would not comply with that CUP.
But it's a PUD.
It's currently PUD. They are requesting to go to C4A, so we need to evaluate it as if it was rezoned.
Okay. Well, you answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. So we have a number of requests before us. Well, we have, excuse me, let me rephrase that. We have a recommendation from the Planning Commission whereby they denied the rezoning from PUD to C4A and the conditional use permit for joint use of parking facility. And so I guess I would ask council, rather than go into each of the individual components, since those two are, at the forefront and lead essentially the rest of the application overall, the denial, the resolution for denial that's before you, your thoughts, and especially as it pertains to the PUD and the conditional use permit for parking. Anybody want to begin with tackling those?
I can start.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember
Let the new
Parkhill.
guy come in.
Well, a new guy who's been on the Planning Commission, so a seasoned veteran.
My thought on this is that, first of all, let me just say that we're dealing with 1,000 linear feet of Wayzata downtown. It's a pretty important piece of property. I think you guys have nailed it on the look and feel, the design, steep roofs, the dome, the large windows, the dormers, the divided cores. It's a great look from Lake Street and from the lake. I think those are really, really good. I think that the scale of the property kind of drives the parking needs. If it were smaller, there would be less demand, so it's sort of a self-imposed problem for you guys. So that's my concern, and I would say that I recommend accepting the denial.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Parkhill. And that's on the rezoning and the
Yes,
conditional use permit.
accepting the resolution.
Okay, very good. Anybody else?
I'll go next.
Okay.
We can just go down the line.
Sure.
I'd actually like to start with thanking the applicant for your resilience, because you've been after this for a while. And I see that you aren't a quitter. And each time I think the application has gotten better. And so thank you for that. I am in agreement that I think the evolution of the design does fit Wayzata. It fits a character. I think you listened to the feedback you received, and it shows in the design of it. But I too think that the density is driving the parking issue. There was a statement made by your lawyer, and I'm just trying to find the note, that says some of this is driven by some of our code. Parking placement. That parking placement should generally be in the back of the building. You are in a location where your choice is to go underground. Going behind your building is not an option. So it's easy to write things in black and white, but we live in a gray world. And perhaps having some street level parking on this particular lot is what you need. I think it would resolve some of the delivery issues, the FedEx trucks, the Amazon drivers, the Grubhubs, people getting deliveries, people get their groceries delivered, all those things. And a lot of that is just based off of human behavior, be it right or wrong. They stop in the middle of the road. They run out. They don't care about the consequence. In the perfect world, they would all go underneath and park, but we live in a world where we all know that that probably won't happen. But if you are allowed to have some on-ground parking, that will only also help your commercial be successful, retail be successful, but it allows for guest parking. So perhaps that's something that we need to look at, depending on how it goes tonight. If you choose to come back with another application, if it's denied tonight, I'm only speaking for myself right now. I do think you're a fighter. I think you will come back, but I will follow the recommendation of the Planning Commission for denial.
Thank you, Councilmember Iverson. Councilmember Fleckish?
I guess I'm up here. I'd like to reiterate some of those comments. You are resilient and you are a fighter, and the demonstrated patience is legion. I think what I heard, you've worked well with the city staff, and I laud you for that. Lots of pros to talk about here. I made notes throughout the night. First, I'd like to say rezoning this makes sense to me. It absolutely should be rezoned, in my opinion. How we get there, we have to debate a little bit, but I think that should be done. Redevelopment is also very necessary for everybody involved. I think the city really wants to see that happen. We just need to kind of get you across the goal line here. I like that the attention you paid to the design standards. It's very clear that you not only paid attention to what was written, but it's clear to me that you listened to all the constituents, the neighbors, the city staff, the council, planning commission, and so forth. So again, hats off to you for that. Let me see here. Attention to safety, I think, was a good one for a variety of reasons. Sans parking, which I'll touch on in just a little bit. But outside of that, I think you paid attention to that, and that's good. And obviously, the stormwater treatment plan that you got for this is far better than what we currently have. So I'm looking forward to that. The only con that I've got is the parking issue. I wish I could, well, it's only going to move forward if everything got approved. I wish I could bifurcate the two elements of what we're voting on tonight, because I would vote in favor of rezoning if we had two separate votes. But we don't. We have one. And the parking, to me, is an issue in a few aspects of that. One is that it's such a long parking row with only one entrance and exit. To me, that could be a safety concern. The lack of the ability for trucks to back up, whether they're semis, which I would hate to be a semi-driver having to do that. And if what Councilman Iverson says is correct, that the FedEx and UPS trucks are not allowed to back up, that's an interesting notion. I hadn't even thought of that. So if that's the case, we got a problem there. I think there will be some traffic disruptions. Not enough to deny this, but it's my perception there. But the big one for me among all the parking issues is that residents would not have dedicated parking. If I was going to buy a place that costs whatever it costs to live there, I would want to know that I actually had dedicated parking. I think there may be creative ways to fix that. The idea of one dedicated and one floating, maybe that's something, maybe some on-street parking. Or God forbid, you should take one building out and make some on-surface parking, which gives you an entrance and an exit on both sides, perhaps. But to me, parking is the issue. You are so close. I think you're so close. But because of the parking issue, I'm going to have to vote in favor of the denial.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Fleckish. Councilmember McDonald?
Well, thanks very much to the applicant, staff, the Planning Commission, and my colleagues up here who really hit most of my points completely with considering this application. I agreed with the recommendations from the Planning Commission. I too, like Alex, really do like the rezoning of this parcel. I think Ms. Pearson from the Chamber made a great point that that side of town does need some action down there. And what I really struggled with this, though, is I don't feel like this application really is furthering the intentions of the C4A district. By just limiting and asking for office space, I think we're missing the mark on what the spirit of the C4A should be on Lake Street, especially at an end where other businesses and other public parks should be. We're gonna have a beautiful one in a region boardwalk that's gonna end right there, and to just have offices there. I think we're missing that that spirit of the C4. I think we could do better at that intention. And then, of course, the issues of the parking. I agree that some surface parking would make those businesses and those residents much happier, and of course, the delivery drivers as well. Your speaker mentioned, just like Councilmember Iverson said, that in our comp plan, we don't ask for surface parking. We prefer it to be hidden, but I believe that it said that we don't want it to be a focal point, which I think there's a lot of area in between having surface parking being a focal point than being completely obscure from the public view. So I think there's room there for some of that surface parking and would make a big difference. You know, the lack of designated parking is an issue for me as well. And that unloading and loading. So I, too, as the rest of you, as the other three, plan to vote in favor of the Planning Commission's recommendation. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember McDonald. I don't want to reiterate everything that my colleagues have mentioned, except to say, again, thank you to the applicant, the Planning Commission staff, and the public for sharing their thoughts. There are just certain areas that, from a health and safety standpoint, I don't think the application has quite met the level of care that we would want to see. And that is, for me, the two-way garage, the only one-way in and out, especially for that long of a stretch, has me very concerned. I absolutely do not want to see trucks backing in and out of a parking aisle or garage into a street. Morning traffic from that side of town down Lake Street is busy, and we do have cars coming. And if we don't have the parking spaces, we have a lot of lots around, just on the other side of the railroad tracks, on the other side of the street, where people will inevitably go hunting and pecking for spots. And we want to be good neighbors, and good neighbors have adequate parking in their own spots, or have agreements with their neighbors to use spots after hours. So, given the nature, I don't remember if it was Councilmember Plekish, but given the nature of these units, there are units that are going to sell for a heck of a lot less money that have dedicated spots. And so I just can't imagine folks spending upwards of however many commas and zeros. I'm not even going to guess. It's not my place to. But we want this to be a full experience for them. And at no point do we want anyone feeling like they got shortchanged by the council, by the Planning Commission in their decision. And with regard, I think Council Members Iverson and McDonald made really good points with regard to the commercial space. The intent of expanding commercial to the west end was not just for offices. What we were really looking for is ultimately foot traffic, retail, restaurants. And so in the spirit of the C4A just having offices, it doesn't look like the mix is there. So I believe, very unconventional, but I would welcome, yes, your comments. Please feel free.
Kurt Fretham, Lake West Development, 14525 Highway 7 in Minnetonka. I appreciate all the deliberation, the hard work staff's done, Planning Commission, yourselves, your outside third parties. There was a couple whys that you asked that I felt like we could give a better response. You asked why or maybe you didn't, but why we're using the conditional use permit for parking is our team looked at your comprehensive guide plan and it says to use it wherever possible. So we did that. If we weren't trying to follow your guide plan to use it, we would have designed it. We have space to do layouts in the garage. I'm certain we could meet the parking requirements. We weren't trying to. We would have 8 extra stalls as shown on the parking slide, Eric, if you could show them that in the parking analysis. And the IT parking standards says we have 45 extra stalls during peak use. So if we have that much extra parking, why do we try to add more? But if it's your desire that you want us to have more, you want us to ignore what the comp plan says and not use it wherever possible, we would have designed it that way. And we could make those changes if you want to make a conditional approval subject to meeting the parking requirements straight up. We would be accepting of that. I just want to share. It's, and then the other point about why we picked C4A, we're trying to make it easy for you in the decision process in the face of opposition to give you a plan that was compliant in every way. So evaluate it for its compliance and you have to approve it. And some people might not like that, but if the elephant in the room is you just don't like it, then you just need to tell us that, and we need to work on a plan that you like. But and I don't know how we get there with that. Maybe it would be a work session with a planning commission member and a city council member and some specific neighbors that have concerns about wanting to see how it's developed to try to come up with more common goals. But to come back with another PUD plan and another PUD plan with the direction we're getting is really tough. I know that's not a part of your decision, but I'm just airing out some thoughts about trying to get to a space where we can all be happy with it. I know it was commented, just make the units smaller. Right now, our average size units are 2,200 square feet. I don't know. I think people are expecting that size. The parking plan shows that we've got 36 extra stalls at any one given time. So we could assign stalls and it shows right there on that chart. But we could assign spots to 30 units or more than 30 units. We could, but that's not required yet. There is a parking plan that's required with the conditional use permit that's due in 60 days from now. If we knew that you wanted to see it ahead of time, we would have provided ahead of time, but we're following your procedures sequential. Give it to us when you ask for it, not beforehand, because you don't want to decide what, we're not getting into details of construction because that's not up yet. Anyway, some feedback. I think there's confusion on some of the points, especially the parking. If you're comfortable with the rezoning of the C4A, we're good with the rezoning of that, independent of all the rest. And we would accept that also as a stepping stone. That's all.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. You know, I just want to clarify what I heard, and I don't want to speak for my colleagues here, but I think that the C4A is not completely out of the question. It's the way it's presented today, given all of the other elements and we're not here to tell you what to put in your building, but what we know from the zoning and what I'm hearing is it doesn't really meet the spirit of the intent of what we would ideally perhaps like to see down besides more offices, right? We have a lot of offices already in town. But
No, keep going.
okay, yep.
I like that.
Just hold on. Okay. I'm also hearing that the way things are currently designed, and please, somebody step in and correct me if I'm misstating anything, is that there are some conflicts with movements. We're not saying SRF is wrong. We're not saying staff is wrong. What we're saying as a council and our personal experiences and listening to these applications over the years, and then hearing citizen feedback after things are built, that we see and hear what is going to give people issues as they move forward. And I'm not gonna speak for anybody else. I do not want to see a semi backing out onto Lake Street. I will lose my mind. So I can't be any clearer than that. So, I mean, we have so many conflicts already based on number of cars. And again, speaking for myself, traffic engineers are great. They look at numbers. They're not even looking, it sounds like, at our numbers based on our code. They're looking at ITE numbers. So let's put that aside. The second thing is, they don't live here. So they have told us many times when we've had our own traffic studies, there won't be any issues, X, Y, and Z. But then there's the human behavior components that we see and we live with because we live in this community and we feel them, that we understand where there are going to be those conflicts and those tensions. So I don't want you to walk away thinking, we don't like the application, but what's been presented to us, there is some fine tuning and tweaking to eliminate conflicts that need to be resolved. And we're not designers. I mean, well, we do have one designer here in the house, but she's not an architect. But we're not here to design it for you, but looking at different options like the surface lot, or creating, a one-way in and on the opposite end, a way out, right? To create that flow. Those are some of the things that I've heard my colleagues talk about in terms of what they need to see to feel comfortable with the application. The design, I've heard nothing but great things about that. The level of care and diligence. And then on a total separate side note, I mean, even if things were going to change today, I would want some assurances, of conversations with BNSF, right, before we start issuing permits, that everybody's on the same page. We have safety plans in place, because ultimately, we want you to be successful, we want the town to be successful, and we want, a beautiful project, which this is. There's just some fine tuning there that needs to occur. But we can't do that given what has been presented to us this evening. Yes, Councilmember Iverson.
Just want to add one thing to your remarks.
Yeah.
Perhaps a workshop is a good option. You'd thrown that out, and maybe that helps give you some clarification moving forward. So just an FYI down the road, potentially.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Iverson, generally, we don't like to have workshops in this type of situation because ultimately, no decisions can be made. So at the end of the day, it's still taking feedback, and then the applicant is trying to figure out what to do with that feedback and then submit. We've done it a long time ago, but we've refrained from that. Maybe there's kind of a way to have like a open house where the community is invited to say, what they like, what they don't. We can talk about what kind of meeting that intent that you're wanting to get out of an workshop.
Well, thank you for the clarification, because I was wondering why we haven't done them for quite a while. So thank you for stating that for me. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So I think from the perspective of where we are this evening, it looks as though at least a simple majority of the council are recommending to approve the denial from the Planning Commission. And then staff would work with you if you were interested in then, submitting what you heard or what staff heard in terms of where our concerns lie with the application as presented. I think that would probably be the next steps. So,
Okay.
City Attorney, City Manager, any additional thoughts on that? No?
No, Madam Mayor, I would just clarify where we're at procedurally. You do need to take action on this tonight unless the applicant grants an extension. So the recommendation from the Planning Commission is to adopt the resolution that's in your packet. It has findings that support that action, and it's really centered on those two pivotal initial requests for rezoning and that parking CUP.
Okay, very good. Then would someone care to make a motion to adopt Resolution 35-2023, denying the rezoning CUPs for joint parking and first-floor multiple-family dwellings, shoreland PUD CUP, and SIP CUP, and design review at 200 Lake Street East?
Madam Mayor, I won't repeat all that, but I'd like to make that motion.
All right, thank you,
Second.
Councilmember Plekish. That's been first and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion passes. All right. We are still in new business, well, I think we're going on to the consent agenda. We'll give everybody a few minutes to clear the room. And then we will take a short recess.
Thanks.
Hey, guys, we are going to take a short recess, and we will reconvene shortly. Okay, we are back in session, and we are now going to cover a couple of items that were on the consent agenda that required, or that was requested that we cover in a little bit more detail. Let's begin with item K, which was approval of professional services agreement with Walker Consultants for preparation of a feasibility report related to access management for the Mill Street parking ramp. City Manager.
Madam Mayor, during the meeting, I put together a little bit of a slideshow, so I'm happy to go through that briefly or just answer any questions that Councilmember Plekish or anybody else has.
Well, why don't we maybe go through questions first? What do you think? Or do we
Yeah,
need-
that's fine with me. I pulled it for a couple of reasons. One is that we do spend a lot of money on consultants to do things, and in most cases, we get great value for that. I think we heard one during our workshop today. In this one, I'm not quite sure, and I wanted to have the opportunity to vote against it, which I can't do in a consent agenda. But the other reason I wanted to pull it is in conjunction with the other item that's being pulled, which is that we were going to vote on this as a consent agenda item to approve a contract with a consultant for an amount that was like 65% over budget. And for transparency reasons, I thought we need to debate that in public. But if we don't need to spend $10,000 on this, we could use that $10,000 maybe on the other thing in some fashion. So that's kind of a combination of reasons why I pulled it. But to talk about this issue specifically, I'm not sure we need to spend $10,000 on studying how we can eliminate graffiti and gathering of people on the top deck of the parking garage. So explain to me or justify to me why we should spend $10,000 to figure that out.
Great question, Councilmember Plekish. So, that didn't do what I wanted to do. See if that works. There we go. So, a little bit of background. This came through this idea through staff and then ultimately the Panaway District Committee to kind of, most importantly, to quell or to help address some of the concerns that we had with gathering folks, or youth, on the top deck of the parking ramp. As you mentioned, we've had some concerns, noise, graffiti, some nuisance type stuff. So that's the reason why we wanted to, that was the impetus for exploring this. And, thinking about it at a high level, we thought, well, we could just drop some plans and get it done. Well, a little bit more complicated than that. No matter what we do in terms of parking infrastructure, access management, whether it's on the top deck or below, it's a pretty complicated infrastructure project that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. We did put in some of the infrastructure knowing that at some point, whether it's for paid parking or this type of issue, we'd probably use it. But all to say, there's a lot more to it, and there might be options that we have too. So this feasibility report would allow us to know what actually would it cost and what are some of the options that we have for maybe staging, top deck first, maybe more on the bottom portion of the ramp later on. In addition, getting back to kind of the root of the issue, in addition to quelling some of the concerns that we've had, we also could use access management infrastructure for snow events, making sure people don't access when it's closed, for valet parking, if for whatever reason we want to just secure one spot for valet parking. Also for just special events, if we're doing the start of the, Boo Bash Dash there, we can close it off and use that type of infrastructure for that. So it's not just about the issues that we've had at the top, but that was the primary issue and the impetus for it. We don't have to do this now. We can wait if we don't think that the issue is pressing. But this did come out of a recommendation from that district committee group and just kind of staff in general in terms of exploring options to, keep control of some of those gatherings at night in the summer.
So let me just explore this a little bit more. Having been on the parking ramp design committee, we pre-wired for arms or mechanisms, whatever they're called, right, to limit access.
Got the conduit in yeah.
Yeah. So we thought about, so we're not re-drilling to put conduit or anything else. Do we have the electrical in there already?
I don't think so, no. I would have to double check with Mike.
Okay. Well, regardless, we currently put up barricades in the winter when we're not going to plow, and we close off the top level of the parking rail, correct?
Correct.
For special events, we could handle it similarly, correct?
Yep.
I mean, just say, hey, there's going to be no parking after, just like we do on the street, 48 hours in advance, parking ramp will be closed, right? Can we not put no loitering, standing, parking after a certain hour? I mean, could we not just put signs that would allow the police? I mean, granted, I know they're not just they're not parking lot monitors, but I mean, it seems like we're making this more complicated than it needs to be. We want to make it easy for the police. We want to eliminate the issues that we've heard about on the upper level of the deck. What other tools and mechanisms do we have? Because it's $10,000 now, but the recommendation, as you said,
Right.
is several $100,000. Are we trying to build a castle when all we really need is, you know, a shoebox? That was a horrible analogy, but.
Madam Mayor, I gotcha. Yeah, I would agree with you if we're just talking about this specific kind of nuisance issue. And I would invite maybe Chief Schultz. I'd asked him to stick around for this conversation because he's really kind of boots on the ground. He's seen what's going on. He's talking to his officers. Maybe Chief, if you could come up here.
Sorry,
Well-
Chief, we've kept you way too long tonight.
But we have added signage there. We've done a lot of those things, and we could certainly explore doing some kind of temporary thing and seeing how it goes. There's no time, it's not time sensitive necessarily. We're not going to be able to do anything this year yet. But if we want to, getting the feasibility report is a needed part of the process, so
Can we
having
put
that
a
be.
chain up that says closed?
Sure, but we
at a
still got to
certain
let
hour?
people out.
Pardon me?
We probably still need to let vehicles out, which the gates would allow for. So maybe,
Sure.
Chief, you can respond a little bit to that.
City Manager Dahl, Madam Mayor, Council. That's one of the concerns that we have. If we're going to address that problem that those folks in Winston Circle are seeing and try to eliminate that as a gathering spot, we want to make it accessible for as many people that legitimately use it as possible. And having a chain there would certainly keep people from being able to exit. We've seen, you know, in the past where we've had barricades up there and they've been removed. You know, if I had my way, I'd put a big old cover on it and say, come on, gather here because it's contained. And, you know, as long as you're doing what kids should do legally and ethically and morally correctly, we would have a space for them. But obviously, it's right in front of a pretty established neighborhood. So we are continuing to see some of these issues this summer. We spoke about the advent of summer at the workshop today, and we're continuing to see that school is out, and we have become a gathering spot. And just had some discussions with my sergeant over text tonight about some of the issues that they're even seeing tonight. So this was just one little caveat of a way that we could, you know, possibly try to alleviate that specific area as an area of concern.
So in terms of the scope of services from the consultant, are we telling them what we want to accomplish and they are going to give a recommendation for the best mechanism to do that and an approximate cost? Or, I mean, help us understand.
Yeah.
I mean, because can't we come up with a similar system as we want an arm, we want to keep people from going in, but we need to let people out? And then work with the chief and the officers to figure out when that sweet spot is from a timing perspective?
Yeah, and that's essentially what they would do, but that requires software. we also have to do it with the understanding that we might want to use it for other things, and if we don't want to rip it out in 5 years if we, want to have a pay system down the road.
Software, meaning software that we have, that we program the arm?
Yeah,
Okay.
yep, exactly.
So if we gave them the parameters of what we were looking to do, and I think that's what's not clear to me, and maybe leads to Councilmember Plecker's question. If we say, this is what we want to do, it costs us $10,000 for them to come back and say, yes, you can put in an arm, and yes, you need software? I mean, isn't that confirming what we already know? Or what information are they providing that we don't have?
How it would be built, how much it's going to cost, so we can plan for that. And it would also take into account the entire facility and what's there, including the other accesses down on the bottom. I asked Director Kelly if we just focused it on the top, would that reduce the costs at all? And he said very little, probably, because it's all kind of, it'd have to be done with the context of the entire ramp in mind.
Okay.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Are these kids going up there, are they bringing their cars, and that's why, so they're kind of all parking up there and hanging out and making a party, or is it they're walking up the stairs and just hanging out?
Yeah,
Or both?
good question, Councilmember Parkle. Most of the juveniles, young adults that we're seeing up there that are part of the problem have vehicles with them. It's not to say that all of them are driving there, but if you watch the amount of vehicle traffic in and out of there at anytime after 5 p.m., I would say, it's a lot of kids, a lot of juveniles, a lot of young adults.
Okay.
So Jeff, maybe we need some additional information from Walker, because when I look on page 125 under scope of services, it just states that we will prepare a letter report that describes and illustrates in plain concept how these areas can be controlled to discourage unwanted behavior. And they're really just looking at two methods, what we've been talking about, either paid or a gate. I don't think paid is going to do anything, because these kids aren't going to pay. They're just going to pull up there. They're going to gather. And so I think the option that we're looking at is a gate. So their scope of services isn't what you just discussed. And I actually wanted to pull this as well, but after having a conversation with the chief, I can't talk, it's so late.
It's late.
It is late. Something has to happen. I didn't realize, I was telling him, like, when I was younger, it was all our regular people that hung out. We'd see a cop drive by and we all, like, spread. He said, well, it's kids from Burnsville, Maple Grove, Roseville, all these other places that talk online, and now that's become kind of the spot where they come hang out. So it's a whole different situation that needs to be controlled. And what I love that you said, Chief, is that we kind of have to start with one area at a time, because I'm like, well, they're just going to all go to the beach, and then they're just going to go here. But what you said was really truthful, is that we got to tackle one area at a time, control that, and then move on to the other ones. I don't know. I'm leaning towards a gate, but maybe we try something in the interim that these kids can't move. I don't know.
Well, I think
It's got to change.
the proposal before us is $9,500. I think what's concerning and what I'm hearing is that the proposal as they provided it is weak. It does not have a lot of substance to it. And I mean, I think we need to do something, for sure. We've been hearing about this for too long. It's been dragging for too long. I mean, this has been at least a year. So to get to this point, a year later, I'm concerned it's going to take another year if we don't move forward, and just to have a plan in place, let alone, get something built. So I'm in favor of spending the money, but with some, I want to see multiple options, and I want to see something more than what they provided in writing here. And if it's just a letter for $10,000, I'm going to be, yeah, I think Councilmember Plekish's expression probably.
The way you described it.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, I'd be happy to, if you want to table this item, happy to make sure that the consultants watch this meeting and the discussion, and we can bring it back at the next meeting and have a more complete proposal in front of you.
I trust you can communicate our concerns. I don't know how everybody else feels, but I think we need to move ahead. But Councilmember McDonald, what are your thoughts?
I think we need to move ahead with this too, as someone who's at the Panaway District Committee meetings all the time. This is one of the things we've been hearing about since meeting number 1.
Yeah.
And I don't mean this with any sort of bit of snark in it at all, but it might come across that way. We don't know what we don't know because we don't know it. So that's why we're hiring these people. And I think it's important to set an expectation that we come back with more than, how about a gate?
Right.
But
Yeah, we thought of that.
so I just wanted to express that I do support this one. I think we should
100%.
move forward.
Yeah. And I appreciate, the chief providing the insights, the Panaway District Committee. I think we do need to move forward. We tease all the time about studies and, we're like studied to death. We should be the smartest people out there, but we pay other people to be smart for us. So I think we all just want to make sure that we don't get into a rut and a habit of, let's trust our gut. We're smart people too, and sometimes let's go down the path of pulling the trigger on a project and without having to hire a consultant and a study before, we go forward.
Well, that's kind of my point, Madam Mayor. I don't think we need to spend this money. I think we have enough brain power and creativity and experience in the city to do this. I don't think we need to spend $9,500 to get a letter that says, hey, why don't you think about doing this? I don't think we need to spend it. And again, particularly given that what we're going to vote on next.
Sure.
Is it a point where this study will provide the people we go out to bid for some groundwork that will end up saving us money in the long term? Because, it'll provide maybe, that's my impression of these things, is it gives sort of like a roadmap or a blueprint to the people who are bidding that would have taken staff time to create all of those things. So
That's exactly right, and it's more expertise. We don't have any traffic or parking ramp engineers. Similar to like the Ferndale sidewalk, we did a feasibility study to make sure that it's even a good investment. And if we're spending a couple $100,000 doing it, we want to make sure that it's a good investment. Even though it's frustrating to have these, this accruing soft cost for everything we do, but I think generally it's still money well spent.
Yeah. So in terms, council's thoughts, vote on it tonight, move forward, table it. What are your thoughts? Councilmember McDonald, move forward?
move forward. I'd say vote on it tonight.
Okay. Everybody else? All right. All right. So who would like to make a motion then to approve the professional services agreement with Walker Consultants for preparation of a feasibility report related to access management for the Mill Street parking ramp?
Make that motion, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. And a second?
Second.
It's been first and seconded. Any further discussion? Am I going to have to take a roll call vote? Let's do a roll call vote, please.
Councilmember McDonald?
Aye.
Councilmember Plekish?
Nay.
Councilmember Iverson?
Nay.
Councilmember Parkhill?
Aye.
Mayor Mouton?
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. Next up, we have the approval for a professional services agreement. Thank you, Chief. With Braun Intertech Corporation for testing services related to the construction of the Panaway Lake Walk. City Manager.
Again, I was able to craft a quick presentation during the meeting tonight, so happy to walk through that.
Excellent. Let's do that.
So why this is on your agenda tonight for the cost over, just a little bit of background that I think is important. Back late this past year, the construction team, this keeps going, budgeted $75,000 at that time as a placeholder in the overall construction budget. This was a soft cost, of course, for testing services related to the boardwalk. Okay. Director Gellner is fixing the timing, so I don't have to always move it back and get noticeably frustrated. And based on, so since then, what's changed? We approved a design late last year, and then more recently, we awarded the bids for the project. So as a result of all that, as a result of having a larger, the docks being involved, and to ensure that we are monitoring vibration, so we're covering our bases if we get claims for, damaged property. We added that, and ultimately, we're way over budget. $164,000 is the bid for these services. We did keep a contingency for soft costs of $25,000, which has not been spent. So that essentially means that we're about $64,000 over. The contingency ultimately, both for hard or soft costs and construction, are basically used to mitigate financial risks, and they go down as the project moves along and there's less unknowns. So, for example, late last year, we bumped the contingency down to 6%, and then just recently to 4% once we knew the bid. So we're getting more information about the project, so there's less risk. So right now, we have a overall total contingency baked in our budget of $390,000, and as I mentioned before, the soft cost contingency is currently at $25,000. We feel strongly that we need to move forward with these expenses. We could table and get another proposal. I don't think we'll have much difference. There's only really one other kind of reputable firm that can do this in town, and they have not been associated with this project before, so there might be some additional costs to get them on board. But we could still try. The one thing I do want to note with this, well, two things in order to mitigate cost. One is that we're going to continue to value engineer and cut costs when we can for all these different vendors that we're using for the construction through value engineering. So that's one. So hopefully we'll be able to offset this overage with future reductions of costs. The other thing is that these are all based on an hourly fee. So this is what they think based on the project that it could be up to, but Mike is hopeful that based on just the project itself, and then if we do ultimately have a tweak in our design, which we're looking at to the docks where we use less piers, then there's going to be less piers to inspect. So there's ways where we think we can mitigate the overall costs. But for right now, we don't know that for sure. So that's why we're asking to approve the overage, and we'll just continue to work on reducing the costs of other things, or hopefully the bill for these services won't be as much because it's not needed.
So we're over by how much in total?
Well, if you take, with not using any of the soft cost contingency or any other contingencies, we're over, if I do the math, just almost $90,000.
I'm just going to be,
I'm sorry, it's more than that. It's
That's about right.
no, it's about,
That's right.
yeah.
yeah, 90,000, yeah, sorry.
So I'll just go ahead and begin, because you and I have talked about this, Jeff. I am not a believer in dipping into our contingent. This is essentially eating our soft cost contingency.
Yep.
Plus, we have remaining funds that need to be paid. I think the work is critical. I'm very disappointed in how off we are in our estimation. We've got both general, that we've hired, plus an owner's rep. I mean, we have a lot of experts, right? We are way off. And by eating into our contingencies and effectively reducing them before the equipment's even out on the water, and we don't know what we're gonna hit out there, as I've mentioned, I'm very, very nervous. And to rely on that has me even more nervous. And to think that we can lower the cost, I mean, I have incredible faith in staff to be very diligent in terms of cost-saving measures and finding opportunities where we can. But it's definitely not a given with a project like this, that none of us were relying on these experts. And we're into uncharted territory. So I am concerned that staff is agreeing to reduce the contingency amount without the council being aware of that over time. And maybe it gets discussed, and maybe it's just kind of there, and it's kind of piecemeal of, oh, well, we'll take some from contingency here or there. But going from 10 to 6 to 4 is a big dollar amount. And it's the cushion that I personally rely on when we approve a project, that we're covered, right? We've got our budget, we've got the money, unanticipated things happen, and we're not gonna be left figuring out how we're gonna pay for something. So that's where I'm at with this. What is the proposal in terms, because I don't think we can get around this. I think it is absolutely critical. They are an incredibly reputable company. They do phenomenal work. The one question with regard to the services, vibration monitoring, we did that with the parking ramp, and that was for the homes, right? We put monitors and documented everybody's home. What are we monitoring out on the lake? Are there specific structures we're concerned about?
Madam Mayor, it's the railroad,
Okay,
and it's also some of the properties, private properties that are, within a couple hundred feet too, on Lake Street.
okay. No, that makes sense. Yeah, so the balance of the money, I mean, it sounds like we're gonna eat up the 25,000 in soft cost contingency, so we won't have any left, correct?
Right, yep.
And the balance will come from where?
It'll come from the construction contingency.
Okay,
And ultimately, as we go along with the construction project, I was thinking about what can we do to make just where we're at more transparent. What we can do is have like maybe a monthly or bi-weekly thing where we kind of just update you on overall cost, where we're at, because there's going to be savings along the way, and we're not going to need council approval to save. You're not going to hear about it necessarily unless I tell you where we're at with things. We're only going to come to you when we're over.
well, I would argue that if we're value engineering and it changes the look and the feel, right? Much like we did with Panaway, we're changing concrete finishes, or we're changing anything that has materiality to it.
For sure.
Yeah, that the council needs to be apprised of and deciding on.
100%, Madam Mayor. I should have been more clear. We've got a lot of soft costs going into this, a lot of consultant time, and so we've got a lot of proposals, and hopefully, some of them are worst case scenarios. There's areas where we're going to be over, there's areas we're going to be under, but hopefully, with tracking and giving you guys updates, on a frequent basis, you'll see progress, and we're not going to have to deal with a significant overall gap in the budget. If we do, we're going to have to look at other value engineering options that you'll be a part of, or, hopefully the Conservancy just keeps raising money, but there'll have to be some tough decisions to make regardless.
Okay. Yes, please.
So Jeff, one of the questions I have a couple of statements, but
Yeah.
one I want to address right now is, could they lay out what part of their bid is so over? I mean, I'm looking at, on page 140, some pretty big numbers in hours. And so what did they initially bid versus what we're seeing in our packet today? And some explanation as to why there's such a significant increase. I mean, this is large.
So good question, Councilmember Iverson. They never really have submitted a bid, to my understanding. It was more a placeholder from Kraus Anderson about just based on the project, high-level understanding of the project, we should reserve $75,000 in the overall budget for these services.
Then do we have room for negotiation with them to say, come back and say, this is kind of the placeholder you put, and now you've come back at a 60-some% increase? What do we do to work with you to get back down to that original number where you're at? I mean,
What?
we have 600 hours of somebody monitoring the piling. We have 112 hours of somebody observing I mean, again, I don't want to downplay what they do. They have been around forever. They're a very good company. But I look at this as project creep already. And so my concern is if they put placeholders in, what else is yet to come? And so how can we work and negotiate with these guys?
So to Councilmember Iverson's question, did Kraus Anderson speak with Braun Intertech before they got this number?
I can't answer that with 100% confidence. I'd have to check with them.
I mean, I think that's my question of
Yeah,
how
it's a good
did
question.
Kraus Anderson come up with the number of 75,000? We were kind of looking to them, before we sent out bid packages, before we decide to bring in various professional services, we look to them to get feelers for what things are going to cost and who's interested in bidding and working for what projects. So that's why when we see overages like this, it's particularly concerning. And so is the negotiation with Kraus Anderson or with Braun Intertech and seeing what both parties can help us with? I mean, they can watch this piece too.
I will be directing them to it.
I mean,
Is there
yes.
any other options besides Braun Intertech? Is there somebody else we could get a quote from?
We could. I'm not hopeful that it would, the outcome would be favorable. And is it worth the time going out there? It might be.
And I guess we're starting piling soon, right?
Yes, early July, yep.
Okay. So we're backed into a corner, okay.
But if, I think it's July 18th, but I'm sure if there was a reasonable savings, we could figure out a way to pivot if need be.
I mean, we still are left with an agreement. I'd like to see it less. I mean, I feel between a rock and a hard place, but I'm going to go out on a limb here. I know just the experience and the quality of the work that they do, the nature of the work that we're trying to do, that we need a partner like them
Right.
to ensure that what we're building is safe and going to last, that we're not, creating any issues or liabilities for ourselves with surrounding properties. We're protecting ourselves in that way. So to that end, I agree with engaging with a company to do this type of service. I am concerned about the cost, and to Councilmember Iverson's point, if there was a way that we could direct staff to enter into negotiations, maybe the city attorney could provide some guidance.
Yep,
on
Madam
that.
Mayor, just a quick point. This is an estimated cost. They can only bill for actual hours of work. So I mean, one option, it's not a super great one, but is to just, I think you've made it clear to the city manager that you're concerned about the cost overall, the estimate. You're concerned about the discrepancy between what one consultant told us and what we got back from this company. So, I mean, I think that's relevant, and they're going to have to prove actual hours on the project. And we can talk to our consultant about if that's realistic or not. So just know that this isn't like we will pay $139,889. We won't unless they actually provide all those hours.
Okay.
They won't exceed it. It's a not to exceed price.
Excellent, thank you. Does that,
Honestly, having been in the business for so many years, I just can't see that happening, that they're gonna come down, or they're not gonna use the hours that they projected. I mean, I've never seen that. If anything, there's just more creep, that there's unknowns, because there's not many people that have done this before, and I think Cross Anderson said that when they were looking for certain contractors, that it's a unique thing, and so I can't see it going down, I can only see it going up, so I hate to be so negative, but there's a lot of unknown with this project.
yep, I understand the concern. Councilmember Fleckish?
No, I'm just ready for the vote when we get to it. What I'll say.
You wanted to pull this item,
I
I'm
did.
just indulging you.
I did. I'll lead into that by saying that, you know, we're not naive. We all know that there are going to be aspects of a project that's going to go over budget, and some will be under budget. That's expected. This one's a little bit outsized in terms of the percentage of an increase, but things like this are expected. The main point I wanted to make with this is if we're going to have a fairly substantial number be that much over budget, it should not ever be put into a consent agenda. For transparency's sake, I think we should air it out for the public to see what's going into this and then what our thoughts are. I'll be in favor of voting for it. I just wanted the public to know what was behind this.
Yep. That's a fair point, absolutely. Okay, then would someone care to make a motion to adopt the professional services agreement with Braun Intertech Corporation for testing services related to the construction of Panway?
I'll make that motion, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Molly. And a second?
Second?
It's been first and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay?
The motion passes. All right, city manager's report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just leave that on. A couple of quick events that I want to just give an update on, since we're not going to have another meeting until, kind of mid-July. Chamber President Pearson did a great job of talking about the Wayzata art experience and the subsequent concert. July 4th is coming up, and we have a bunch of events back to normal after a couple of years of COVID. We have the mini Olympics and the Kitty Parade starting at 10 a.m. on the 4th. And then the actual Olympic events start at 12:30. That's at Wayzata West Middle School. Kitty Parade will be going down Park Street and Broadway. Of course, we have the Flying Pancake Breakfast on the 4th as well. That's from 8 o'clock to 12 p.m. at the depot. And I appreciate our staff working with Kraus and other folks to ensure that that won't be negatively impacted by the construction and everything. So there might be some stuff on site, but they're going to be pushed off, so it should be just fine. Hopefully get good weather. It's always just a fun event and extremely busy. And then lastly, we're going to have a sand breaking event. So not a groundbreaking, but a sand breaking, since it's a lake walk. That's going to be on July 12th, which is Wednesday at 1 p.m. I hope to see most of the, if not all the council there and community members. You know, once the lake walk is complete, it'll be a huge community event, or invite everybody else. This is really meant just to get the stakeholders out and celebrate this threshold and let people know what's going on, and save kind of a more kind of cohesive community event for when we open it.
And that's what date again?
July 12th, I believe, which is a Wednesday.
Perfect.
1
I
PM.
make sure it was on my calendar.
Yeah, is
Since I
it?
said I was going to be there.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
Yes, thank you.
And we'll have like, so the mayor, our designer, Carl Anderson, and the Conservancy will all kind of say a few words and break some sand, however that works. So that's it, Madam Mayor.
Well, thank you. All right, well, our last order of business is a motion to adjourn. Would someone care to make that motion?
I'll make,
No? Well, you're off, so go
I'll
ahead.
make that motion, Mayor.
I'll second.
First and second, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? The motion passes. We are adjourned.